flowers on the floor, and a broken heart. Our loser of the time just got dumped. You're a Sung Jinwoo lookalike but broke as a truck and weak. Stop looking for me, trash. 5 minutes ago, I just got out of the dungeon and went to sell the loot. Every loser is looking at me with suspicion since I'm just a simple miner. This dude approaches me saying, "Get away, you can't afford to pay for it, and you're smelly as a truck." Boom. Look at my thick sword, bitch. Bring your appraiser right now, I said. But that's when a tight pink dress appears, and the dude ignores me, going to negotiate with the fake-ass couple. Sue King? It's been a week since we broke up, and she recognizes me instantly. Her new slave asks if she knows me, but she anxiously pretends she don't. But since I said her name, and he's a side character who wants to be humbled, he rushes forward to break the sword I was going to sell. Plin! His so-called legendary sword breaks into pieces. Ayo, your sword is the real trash, I say. Ex-bitch starts roasting the cuck. What the hell? Didn't you say the sword was worth a lot? Bro's anger management isn't his trump card, so he leaps to punch me, but I'm easily dodging everything. He steps to the side and delivers a sequence, but everything looks slow as hell to me. This guy is an E-rank miner, so how is he dodging everything? He thinks. I'm not Hisoka, but my dark mana has the properties of rubber and gum, and bro went straight to kiss the floor. Tight dress is shocked, and I activate my spiderweb, using this dude as a punching bag while my ex runs and cries desperately. Both hit the wall like trash, and Lil Girl just found out the real meaning of gender equality in real time. But how did an E-rank miner like me, who was drowning in debt a few weeks ago, pull it off? That his family died due to mining for those loan sharks. He's working hard, trying to awaken and pay the debts, but life hasn't been easy in any way. But here we are, diving into another dungeon. His name is Lee Yi, and he risks his life to connect energy stones. Yo, dude, work hard and in 35 years you're going to buy an apartment, this ugly-ass ninja says. But our bro doesn't look happy with this capitalistic offer, even more considering that those dungeon dimensions are deadly to anyone who enters. Boomers in the car are talking about our G. Ayo, isn't he the loser whose parents died and left a crazy debt? Yes, and he's never going to pay it since he's weak as a truck, Lee Yi thinks. Sometimes people become weak, not because of their fault, but because society's rules went insane. I will turn my life around. The moment he thinks that, the floor begins to shake. Boomer gang is fully confused and scared. Shut up, gang. We're fine. There is no monster in here. Bro couldn't even finish his words and was impaled. Everyone's shocked, and bro's legs are shaking. A bunch of high-level monsters suddenly appear, and now it's free for all. Bro tries to run. He needs to reach the dimension exit, but gets hit by a human arrow and gets crushed. Looking to the side, he sees the rest of the gang getting in the car and leaving him behind. But not for long. These monsters aren't going to let a single ninja get out of there. They leap forward. Everything explodes. Monsters and humans burning. I notice they're weak to fire, so I glance at a torch at my side. The moment I think about grabbing it, Blackface comes in to hit me. I almost get torn apart, but now I at least have a way to fight back. I'm looking ridiculous for sure, but those damn monsters are steady for now. I created an opening. All of this had started 10 years ago when the gates first appeared. From them came dimensional creatures, insect-like horrors, demonic beasts, and only awakened individuals could fight them. That gave humanity a fighting chance to close the gates and kick off a whole new era of interdimensional exploration. The problem was that not everyone awakened. In our protagonist group, there were only regular people, taxpayers, bill payers, background characters in the grand scheme of things. And now the few survivors were desperately trying to hold burning debris as makeshift weapons to protect themselves. One of the more nervous ones pointed out that it wouldn't last much longer. That's when our protagonist mentioned the storage room. There was still a lot of gasoline in there. If they seal off the cave entrance with fire, they might survive long enough for rescue to arrive. Showing strong leadership, he ordered everyone to form a circle for protection. They were able to move toward the cave entrance while keeping the creatures back. Once they reached the gasoline barrels, our protagonist told them to pour the liquid at the cave entrance, and they obeyed immediately. One of the creatures stepped right onto the flammable trail, and our guy ordered the torches to be thrown. It didn't take long before the gasoline caught fire, spreading flames across the area and burning one of the monsters. Thanks to his quick thinking, one of the miners even praised him. Now that they were inside, they noticed that 5 of their companions were gone. The remaining miners, however, seemed ready to follow his lead. The only problem was that this cave felt far too mysterious for anyone to feel safe. Inside the cave, there's a very peculiar statue. One of the workers mentioned that it had been discovered a long time ago, and that the supervisor had originally planned to take it and sell it on the black market, which is why they were there in the first place. Our protagonist noticed that the construction seemed incredibly old, while the other workers were busy trying to contact rescue. As soon as they managed to get a signal, they reported the attack and everything that had happened. Unfortunately for the miners, help would only arrive in 2 hours. Until then, they'd have to do whatever it takes to survive. When one of the miners begged for the rescue team to hurry, he was completely ignored. He and his coworkers would have to fend for themselves. Their first challenge was the limited power supply in their protective suits, which would only last for about an hour and a half. After that, there wouldn't be much they could do. Our protagonist immediately checked the battery on his own suit and saw that it still had 61% charge left. In the middle of all the chaos, one of the miners called everyone's attention. He said that not everyone was going to survive, and in a situation like this, sacrifices had to be made. He suggested killing the old man and the orphan, our protagonist, so their suit batteries could be reused. Since no one was waiting for them outside anyway, they'd be doing everyone a favor. Threatening our protagonist, he ordered him to hand over his battery. Then he started beating him with a wooden stick. Our guy was just too weak to fight back, and now he was crying, completely helpless. Determined to speed things up, they started ripping the mask off his face, hoping maybe the radiation in that dimension would force him to awaken. Our protagonist crawled across the ground, gasping for air, desperately trying to get his mask back. But to those bastards, the chance of him awakening was basically zero, and now they had another battery to keep themselves safe. After taking him down, they started looking for other victims to torment. One of the miners shoved his colleagues toward those psychos and then tried to run. Before they could catch him, he managed to climb into one of the vehicles. Once inside, he decided that if his life was going to end there, everyone was going down with him. He immediately floored the truck, which sent the remaining miners into a panic. If the truck broke through the wall of fire outside the cave, the creatures could get in. During the escape, the statue that had been loaded onto the truck fell to the ground, landing right in front of our protagonist. Barely alive, he thought the statue was smiling at him. And holy hell, it really was smiling, a crazy, twisted grin. What the hell? That statue looked straight up demonic. Maybe he was hallucinating from the radiation, maybe it was just his mind playing tricks on him. But one thing was certain, that smile was disturbingly sinister, way too creepy to ignore. At that moment, a creature managed to break into the cave and completely shattered the statue. And now that same creature from the very first chapter we were talking about was about to finish off our protagonist. Poor guy, suffering from radiation poisoning and now about to be killed. That was when the monster dragged its hand across his stomach, and our boy remembered the moment he became an orphan, completely abandoned by the few relatives he had left, none of whom wanted anything to do with him. He had been condemned to a miserable life, humiliated at every step. He even tried to investigate his parents' deaths, but the corporation was far too powerful. All those complaint letters he wrote were useless. In the end, they just annoyed people instead of helping him get justice. In fact, for the owner of that company, it was our boy's parents who were to blame for their own deaths, because they were reckless and caused millions in damages. Poor guy, all our protagonist could do was cry because he didn't have the strength to fight back. Completely abandoned, he was being beaten up by the loan sharks. After all, in their minds, the only good orphan is the one who pays an unpayable debt. While he was going through this completely involuntary massage session with those very unqualified chiropractors, our boy reflected. The only thing left for him now was to become an interdimensional miner, the only way he could ever repay the debt. After being brutally impaled, he decided to let his hatred burn all the way to the 8th sense. He swore he would go down fighting. On his deathbed, he bit the creature. At that point, being weak or not didn't matter. What mattered was doing something. And apparently, the bite worked, because it annoyed the creature enough to throw him to the ground. After that act of courage, he realized he no longer had the strength to do anything. But then the sinister creature from the shadows, probably the same one connected to that statue, noticed something in him. He had potential. But for our boy, nothing made sense anymore. The statue was just as weak as he was, and it had been smashed to pieces. The shadow entity, however, said it could save him if he handed over his body right now. But our protagonist had already suffered too much in life, and he didn't want to make another one of those ridiculous deals. For him, it would be better to die and finally have some peace. The entity liked his resolve. Here he was refusing such a tempting offer even with almost no time left to live. But now, the choice wasn't his anymore. The shadow system was activated, and before the creature could crush him under its feet, it sensed something was wrong. A dark, malevolent energy filled the air, forcing it to kneel. The shadow entity had taken over our boy's body. Its first act was to make that creature regret ever breaking the statue. A giant foot made of shadows came down and crushed the creature in a gesture of pure vengeance. After that, the other creatures became frightened, but proving they had the IQ of a fentanyl addict, one of them still chose to attack. Before it could even get close, a huge shadow creature appeared beneath its feet and swallowed the monster whole. There was nothing it could do. The shadow entity found the taste of that thing absolutely disgusting. Now fully restored, it turned its attention to those scumbag miners. It wondered what would happen to our protagonist if it gave his body back to its rightful owner. The flat earth, my friend, doesn't spin, it flips. The very same miners who had just tried to kill our boy were now on their knees begging for their lives, saying they just wanted to survive. One of them even had the nerve to say that if he hadn't ripped the mask off our boy earlier, he never would have awakened. So maybe he should be grateful. But for our boy, there was no such thing as gratitude toward a bunch of creeps like them. That comment just made him even angrier. Still, he decided to knock the miners to the ground, and one of them begged him to let it all go. Our protagonist allowed them to run away, even offering to help them. He immediately used his shadows to rip the mask off the first of those bastards. Moments later, two of them were already completely exposed, and the radiation started doing its delightful little tricks. Now that two of the scumbags had been taken care of, the remaining miners were terrified of what our protagonist was capable of. Walking up to those who hadn't been hostile from the start, he handed them the batteries taken from the ones he had just executed. The shadow entity spoke right into our boy's ear, telling him he should abandon all that useless compassion because it would only get him into trouble. Our boy told the entity to shut up because he doesn't like taking orders from strangers. The entity replied that it was looking forward to seeing if he'd still act like that once his life was on the line. Now, outside the cave, he noticed that even more creatures had decided to join the party. And for the first time since gaining his powers, our protagonist hesitated. That overwhelming number could be a real problem. The shadow entity suggested he give up his body again, promising to wipe those creatures out in the blink of an eye. Now that it was living inside him, it noticed that his legs were shaking like bamboo swaying in the wind. It was time for him to use his head. Jumping straight into the fight, our protagonist once again said he doesn't like taking orders from anyone. Then the brawl finally began. He was moving with the agility of Spider-Man and the durability of Superman, but the creatures were tricky. They attacked from behind, bit, leaped, somersaulted, and our boy realized his reflexes had gotten a lot sharper. The problem was, they were still dangerous. The shadow entity said he was useless if he relied only on brute strength. So he focused his strange power into one hand and punched one of the creatures with everything he had, telling the entity to shut up. That was when he finally realized how much stronger he had gotten. The problem was, the creature was still standing. All he wanted was for one of his hands to be holding a weapon. The moment he thought about it, a dagger made of shadows appeared. Now our boy was about to turn into a full-on creature butcher. Using his new strength and agility, he managed to take down one of the enemies, which filled him with joy because he could finally end these hybrid monsters once and for all. It was at that moment that he fully understood he had become awakened. But just as he was distracted, daydreaming like a 13-year-old girl thinking life is perfect, he took a hit to the back and snapped back to reality, immediately counterattacking the creature. That was his reminder that there were still plenty left to kill. Thankfully, he had the strength to answer every attack. After a few minutes, all the creatures were dead, and our boy was completely out of breath. He decided to lay down on the ground to catch it, because that had been brutal. Finally, the system notified him that he had awakened. He was now at E rank. After that thrilling adventure inside the portal, our boy was taken to the hospital. While being monitored, the nurse said he was fine, since awakened individuals usually have exceptional physical condition. The only question left was what rank he'd end up at, and the doctor said they'd soon find out. He just had to wake up first. At that, the doctor told them to move on to the next patient, but judging by the nurse's expression, it was obvious she wanted to spend a little time alone with our protagonist. Apparently, she was trouble. While he slept, a shadow creature was disappointed that the human it possessed turned out to only be E rank. With the power it had, it expected at least S class. Now it was trapped inside a weak body. Truly disappointing. When our boy finally woke up, he heard the entity's voice and asked why it kept annoying him. Full of arrogance and pride, the entity told this foolish human to pay attention. Its name was Shang, and it came from an ancient supreme race that ruled over every hell and dimension. Now, it ordered the boy to dedicate his body and become its herald. Our boy had never heard of anything like that before and figured the creature must have made it all up just to trick him. What he didn't realize was that the creature could read his thoughts, and it was pretty offended by what he was thinking. It demanded that he hand over his body again, but our boy thought it might be some kind of spiritual possession or that his body would be stolen. Either way, he figured it was better not to provoke that thing. He started running through every possible idea he could think of to get out of this situation, since losing his body was not an option. Every idea he had was completely absurd, which just made the entity even more annoyed, until finally it angrily popped all those thought bubbles and called him ridiculously naive. Frustrated, the creature realized it had been terribly unlucky to end up bound to such a useless human. It opened a portal right there in the hospital room and threw our boy into another dimension, telling him he had 3 days to raise his rank, or he'd be completely destroyed. When he got back on his feet, our boy noticed he was somewhere completely different, which was weird considering he remembered being in a hospital room just moments ago. The entity explained that this dimension belonged to it, and that this was the insect nest challenge. Each awakened person could only go through this place once. Our boy quickly understood what he had to do. In front of him appeared a massive hybrid insect with a thick, armored shell. The entity told him he now had access to its knowledge and needed to get used to it. The shadow system seemed like something truly interesting. Without wasting any time, our boy used his shadow dagger. He was still shocked by the speed he had now, but even so, the demonic insect was furious and still very much alive. He dodged the attack and spotted a blind spot, determined to take advantage of it. He struck at the creature's shell, but it didn't do a thing. He was thrown backward by the monster's counterattack and realized his dagger wasn't going to pierce that armor. Watching all this, the entity was already getting irritated. Not only was he weak, he was also stupid, relying solely on brute force. Ignoring the entity's insults, our boy kept trying to solve things with violence, while the entity just waited for him to beg for help. After several strikes, the insect finally lost its patience and unleashed a devastating shockwave, hurling him across the area. The entity tried to get him to react, and that's when Lee noticed something on his shoulder. It was the creature's blood. Somehow, he had actually wounded his enemy. Now he finally knew the monster's weak spot. Good, he had found the weak point, but the insect was now completely enraged at him. Even so, he decided he was going to kill this thing no matter what. That actually surprised the entity, seeing this weak, useless human suddenly using the power of the shadow sense. It was as if our protagonist had drunk from the fountain of plot power. Suddenly, he was able to slice through the monster's shell. Sarcastically, the entity commented that he had gone through all that trouble just to cut off one of the insect's legs. Clearly, he must be an embarrassment to his entire family. Our boy shot back that hitting weak spots was much easier than the entity seemed to think, and apparently it hadn't even noticed that before. Determined to finish the fight, our protagonist knew he needed a much better weapon, so this time he summoned his shadow spear. Within seconds, he was ready to bring suffering to the insect monster. He finally managed to get under the creature and deliver a devastating strike to its abdomen. Breathing heavily, he realized he had finally achieved the victory he wanted so badly. Right next to him, the passive-aggressive entity just muttered that he had worked way too hard to defeat something that weak. Right after that, our protagonist felt a strange power surging through his body. The entity explained that it was an energy stone capable of increasing the level of his ability. It didn't take long for our boy to sense something approaching, meaning that cave might become even more dangerous. The entity suggested he use the shadow sense to check things out, but our boy had no idea what that even was. The malicious spirit told him he needed to focus his senses and channel energy into his eyes to activate the ability. Finally, he managed to get control over it. His shadow sense was now at level 1. Through it, he saw that at the end of one of the corridors, there was another insect, and right then, was about to attack him. Luckily, he dodged every single projectile, and after watching the destruction they caused, he realized they were probably poisoned. Now he had to avoid every attack, which annoyed him to no end. Even with his senses sharper than ever, the attacks also came from behind, but thanks to the plot-powered boost he received, he dodged them all. Feeling pressured, he told the entity that this shadow sense seemed useless, and the evil spirit snapped back that the problem wasn't the ability, it was him. The skill was amazing, he was just weak. That insult made our boy furious. He decided to gather more energy by taking down those monsters. The truth is, the passive-aggressive spirit companion was impressed that an E-rank awakened could control this ability so easily. Things were getting more and more interesting. Using his overpowered senses, he now had the vision of a predator stalking through the forest, seeing every single one of his enemies. Thanks to that, he realized just how badly outnumbered he was, which made him nervous. The spirit, on the other hand, was waiting to see a little determination from him. Within seconds, all the insects rushed straight at him. The entity noticed that our boy had found a perfect position on the battlefield, meaning he might actually last a bit longer. Clearly losing patience, our boy let all his energy explode outward, slicing apart the enemies that charged him. The evil entity realized that he had just unlocked the second stage of the shadow sense, a pleasant surprise for it, considering the boy who was seen as weak was now using ridiculous abilities. Even though more enemies kept coming, our boy noticed the insects seemed to be moving slower and slower, without realizing that he was actually the one moving faster. With his heightened senses, he could now see glowing points of light on the bodies of his enemies, showing him exactly where their weak spots were. The passive-aggressive entity explained that once his ability identified the weak points, his attacks could bypass any defense. Planting his daggers into the ground, Lee caused several shadow spikes to erupt and impale every one of the insects. Because of all this, he absorbed multiple energy stones, increasing his proficiency even more. Now that he could see each weak spot clearly, finishing the job was becoming easier and easier. Our boy plowed through the swarm of arthropods, proving himself far more effective than any pesticide. Suddenly, he had to dodge. One of the insects was so fast it almost took his head off. He quickly realized this beetle was completely different from the others. To respond, he transformed his dagger into a whip, surprising even the malicious entity. Now that he had a new weapon, our boy managed to trap that damn beetle, and within seconds, ripped its head clean off, all while still being attacked by the other insects that were hell-bent on ending his life early. And our boy was more than happy to grant them their wish, slicing open the abdomens of every last one of those stupid arthropods. As he absorbed more and more energy stones, his skill proficiency kept rising. With the sheer number of enemies coming at him, our boy might actually be able to rank up. Watching all this, the entity was starting to look a little more optimistic. Maybe this useless human really did have some potential. It could see that his mastery over the shadows was growing rapidly, which was good news. The downside, however, was that using those shadow techniques was burning through a ton of mental energy, a price you have to pay. In the middle of the fight, our protagonist noticed his vision was starting to blur. Not good at all. While trying to catch his breath, he got struck from behind by one of the arthropods, which seemed eager to take a bite out of him. After getting hit like that, our boy became determined not to die in that cave. He had only 15 minutes left. To motivate himself, he remembered all the scumbags waiting for him back in the real world. In his mind, he was sure his parents' deaths were unjust, so he had to take revenge on at least half a dozen of those bastards. As time passed, he kept slaughtering the arthropods in a fury, driving his progress higher and higher, until finally, the only things left on the ground were the shredded remains of those arrogant bugs. Our boy sat down on a throne made of corpses, deciding on just one thing: to make every single person who had ever looked down on him beg for forgiveness. The dark entity realized that human hatred was extremely compatible with shadow abilities, which explained why the boy had so much potential. But then it reminded him that his time was running out. He needed to rank up immediately. Maybe he was already trying to channel all his energy for one last attack, and that was exactly what he planned to do. Summoning all the power of his shadows, and with just 2 seconds left, he was ready to unleash a devastating blow against the approaching insects. But did it work? We find out right away, because just before the time was up, he still hadn't hit a single one of those creatures. Fortunately, thanks to the power of plot armor, with just 1 second remaining, he killed enough of them to rank up to Gi class. Completely out of breath after the battle, and having pushed himself to the limit, even got a passive-aggressive congratulations from the dark entity. Looking over the battlefield's wreckage, he spotted a broken sword. The entity explained that this training ground had once been used by its tribe in the past, and that, according to human ranking standards, this weapon was at least A rank. But after picking it up, our boy realized it wasn't a dagger at all. It was the size of a door. The entity assured him that compared to his shadow abilities, these abandoned weapons were worthless. Even so, our boy decided to collect them all, thinking they might be useful someday. That left the entity curious, and our boy admitted that he didn't hate capitalism quite as much as he claimed. He was going to sell them later. Only awakened individuals ranked D and above are allowed to sell gear, so now he needed to get registered. When he arrived at the awakened registration building, he was furious to discover it still had him listed as E rank. The secretary told our boy that his attributes were actually very good, but they couldn't detect any energy fluctuations at all, which is why she could only register him as E rank. On the bright side, since he was already registered there as a minor, he get a 15% pay raise. Outside, our boy admitted to himself that the shadow system really was incredible, and the entity told him that human perception was far too limited to grasp its true potential. Now our boy realized he could use this to his advantage. The problem was that selling all those weapons and tools was going to be complicated. His only option now was the black market. To the entity, that sounded like a very interesting way to live. When he got there, the shady regulars of the black market immediately noticed him. His clothes made him look like an ordinary nobody. The entity, taking in the atmosphere, remarked that humans were clowns, gathering a few magic stones and sticking them into mediocre weapons, thinking they'd made something incredible. They even pitied our boy for being among them. One of the thugs hanging around decided to ask what a miner was doing in a place like this, then tried to shoo him away. Our boy decided to keep his pride and asked if that was how customers were treated there. Only then did he reveal the artifact he had brought, showing them the dagger, which was actually a sword made for someone at least 10 meters tall. People around him were shocked, and a suspicious-looking couple approached him. The girl clearly wasn't happy about being dragged into that filthy place. The man with her was a D-rank awakened, while she was just a background extra. The merchant immediately recognized the man as a very important customer and decided to treat him well, since money talks in that place. Inspecting the sword our boy had brought, the merchant saw that it had an attack bonus, perfect for D-rank awakened fighters. That's when our protagonist heard the man's name, King, and realized he actually knew him. Or rather, he recognized the woman. Flashback. After he became an orphan, she had abandoned him too, because all he had left were debts and no money at all. The girl had gone off to find someone who could at least pay her bills. The other awakened, surprised, asked if they knew each other. The girl lied, saying she didn't hang around with people from the lower class. After that, the merchant started treating our boy worse and worse since he was being too familiar with an important client's woman. That same client decided to intimidate our protagonist, ready to strike him with his sword, the one with the attack bonus, to show who was in charge. He swung at him, but our boy hid behind the massive sword he had brought to sell, and the artifact was so solid that the attacker's shiny sword shattered into countless pieces. Our boy told him that the real trash in that market was the weapon that fool was holding. The girl who saw the whole thing didn't understand what happened and started scolding her boyfriend, saying he had told her that sword was powerful, so he shouldn't have been humiliated like that. Now, having lost his expensive weapon and humiliated in front of his girlfriend, the furious hunter, pushed over the edge by her nagging, charged at our protagonist. Poor guy. Our boy noticed that this idiot was actually slower than the bugs he fought, and yet, still confident, the attacker complimented his reflexes, thinking maybe it was just luck. Then he went for a flurry of attacks, but every single one of them failed miserably. Our boy realized that the attacks really were pathetic. The very insects he had defeated before would have been ashamed to fight someone that weak. On the other side, the other awakened fighter was getting more and more furious, convinced he was just facing some poor, debt-ridden, orphaned miner with nothing to his name. That only made him angrier. No matter how much power he put into his strikes, he still couldn't land a single hit on our protagonist. Finally, our boy ran out of patience. He used his shadows to bind the idiot's fist, stopping him from moving as he pleased. With a sadistic look in his eye, our protagonist decided it was time to put these extras in their place. He immediately pulled on his shadow whip, slamming the guy to the ground like a sack of trash. Humiliated once again, the man tried to get up slowly, helped by his background character girlfriend. To our boy, the guy now looked like a dog on a leash, because that's exactly what he was, tied up by a shadow collar. But even while being humiliated so brutally, the fool decided to make an even bigger embarrassment of himself, charging again at our boy, determined to take his life. Before he could even get close, someone very powerful in the black market showed up, ordering them to stop the fight immediately. This man did not like what he was seeing. Even though that fool was a loyal client, he didn't tolerate trouble in his store. The name of this mob boss was Juan, and he was a D-rank awakened as well. The girl who had abandoned our protagonist stepped in and said that this damn miner had insulted her boyfriend and broken his sword. That's why he was attacked. That immediately made the boss very curious, since he was now face to face with a miner, something hard to believe. He wanted to know if the sword our boy was holding was really capable of breaking a weapon of that quality. Our protagonist made it clear he had only been defending himself. The idiot's sword broke during the attack, and that wasn't his fault. The boss then asked his loyal client if that was true, but apparently the two of them knew each other well enough to start whispering something shady, clearly plotting to set our protagonist up. Before that, though, the boss tried to play mediator and said he would handle the situation fairly. Approaching politely, he asked to inspect the sword for just a moment. In a few seconds, he was completely shaken. With all his strength, he could barely hold it up. It had to weigh hundreds of kilos. Now he was wondering how this poor, debt-ridden, orphaned, supposedly useless miner was able to wield it so easily. Curious, he asked how someone so mediocre had gotten his hands on something that valuable. But our boy, full of confidence, asked since when the black market cared about where the items brought in came from. The boss realized he wouldn't be able to trick him and said he was just curious. So our protagonist decided to play along too, revealing that he had found the sword while mining. That convinced the boss that our boy really was just a miner. He said the sword was strong and durable, even though it didn't have any enchantments, meaning it wasn't worth much, unlike his loyal client's sword, which had been worth millions. And with that, he made what he called a very fair and friendly offer. Since our boy was just a miner, he would buy that piece of trash for a fair price to compensate for the financial loss his client had suffered, suggesting that our protagonist should see it as an act of charity. After hearing that offer, the loyal client immediately agreed to it, telling our protagonist he'd forgive his debt. But right after, he turned to his girlfriend and said that if the idiot didn't accept the deal, it'd sell his organs for at least $2 million. That's when our protagonist realized he was walking into a trap. They had planned everything while pretending to negotiate. Now that they were all guilty, it was time for him to have some real fun. Unleashing the power of his shadows right there in the black market, he made it clear he wasn't the one who should be worried. The mob boss's bodyguards started walking toward him, ready to take him down. Juan confidently told his loyal client that the fight was already over and suggested they go somewhere more private to discuss the profits of the future sale. But what he didn't expect was to see one of his own men flying past him like a sack of potatoes. Looking back, he got worried. His bodyguards were being beaten senseless. All he could see was our protagonist kicking those extras around like soccer balls. One of them was even thrown toward the loyal client, who showed his D-rank strength by dodging it and violently kicking the poor man's body aside. Now that our boy had dealt with those useless guards, it was time to face the real enemies. Getting more and more worried, his ex-girlfriend was asking herself when this miner learned to move like that, while her boyfriend was eager to take him down. Charging at him once again, he shouted that against a D-rank awakened, our protagonist was nothing, a nobody. But before he could even get close, our boy coated one of his hands with shadow power and slapped his enemy hard, injuring him in the process. That just made the spoiled brat even angrier. He'd never even been hit by his father, and now some other man had slapped him across the face. He was now completely determined to take our protagonist's life, launching several energy beams at him, but none of them could break through his defenses. Only then did the fool realize his abilities were useless against him. Our boy calmly walked toward them, ready to teach them a lesson, and his ex-girlfriend started to panic. Before they could even react, they were completely trapped in shadow webs, one of our boy's abilities. Pinned down, the fool started to think our protagonist had to be at least C rank, maybe even B rank. But Lee made sure to tell them he was just an E rank awakened, officially registered as a minor. Raising one of his hands, now glowing with shadow energy, he was about to slap his rival again. Before the blow landed, the brat tried to defend himself, saying he was connected to important loan sharks. Unfortunately for him, those were the same loan sharks trying to make our protagonist pay an impossible debt, which only made him angrier. Then he started slapping the fool mercilessly. After that humiliating beating, he kicked him away, knocking his ex-girlfriend back too. The one who tried to kill him had just been humiliated yet again. For our boy, that kind of scum, the ones who work with loan sharks, are exactly the people he despises most. After saying this, he was almost caught by an attack from behind, launched by Wang himself. But our protagonist just glared at him, unleashing all the power he had been holding back. That was enough to terrify everyone in the room. Faced with the situation, the poor fool who had just been beaten by our protagonist was willing to offer money to be spared. But our boy didn't like the offer. It was far too small, so he decided to beat him a bit more. He told him that he'd be completely forgiven after receiving 50 slaps. Only then did the desperate guy offer his black card, saying there should be 5 million Korean won on it, enough to calm him down. Our boy immediately realized that this money must have been collected by extorting innocent people, just like what had been done to his parents, and that only made him even angrier. Dropping the guy's body on the ground, our protagonist said that money was nothing more than rightful compensation after being extorted by loan sharks. He finally let the couple go back to their mediocre lives since that humiliation session had been intense enough. Furious, the man slapped his girlfriend in the face, blaming her for convincing him that our protagonist was just a minor. Now he wanted revenge because money wasn't something easily replaced, and he was willing to do whatever it took to make our protagonist pay. He called a very violent man, the one in charge of all the loan sharks, who was already aware of what had happened. Someone had stolen money from one of his subordinates. Now that he knew, he told all of his men they had a very interesting mission to carry out. They could wipe out everyone still alive in that place. One of them executed the wounded victims on the spot with terrifying skill. Back at the awakened building, someone approached our boy, apparently wanting to help him. He told this person that he was an E-rank awakened looking for missions that matched his level. Hearing that, other awakened nearby assume he must be trash, trying to take on something way too dangerous, since even most basic missions there were D-rank. A random background-looking woman mocked him, saying it was hilarious that an E-rank awakened was basically trying to get himself killed by taking missions he couldn't handle. To them, E-ranks were just garbage, parasites of the world. Right away, they all ganged up to try to kick him out of the building because, as they said, trash belongs in the trash heap. But our boy had just received 5 million won, and he knew his top priority now was getting an interesting mission. While he was being harassed by all those extras, someone walked in, and their presence was absolutely overwhelming, making everyone there feel intense fear. That pressure was truly insane. Whoever it was had to be at least D-rank. All the other awakened were terrified. Then it was revealed that the person was actually a cosplayer. Her clothes were strange, her design unusual, but she was definitely strong. Our protagonist studied her carefully, wondering what a D-rank was doing there. He could feel she had a strong energy about her, yet she still seemed like a spoiled, delicate girl. And more importantly, he didn't sense any killing intent from her. The girl was accompanied by a bodyguard. Apparently, they were looking for someone D-rank, preferably a minor, to enter a dungeon. It didn't take them long to spot our boy, who looked completely unfazed by the girl's intimidating aura. Finally, our protagonist realized it was his time to shine. The cosplay girl, on the other hand, was impressed with how calm he was, completely unaffected by her pressure. While the receptionist was trying to guide her towards some decent awakened fighters, the girl said it wouldn't be necessary. She had already found the minor she needed. The receptionist quickly tried to explain that our protagonist had only just arrived and that what she was suggesting might go against the rules. But showing him that power is what really rules the world, she made it clear that she was the one who made the rules and she had already decided that he was her minor. With that, they headed to another room and our protagonist followed her. It was the first time the receptionist had ever seen anything like this in his life. Once inside the dungeon, a creature tried to attack the awakened team. A man who specialized in playing the flute began to use his instrument, but his song was so deadly that it literally made the creature's head explode. It became clear that the cosplay girl's team was extremely well balanced with awakened fighters of all different classes. Our protagonist noticed how smoothly they worked together and how easily they progressed through the mission. But there was something bothering him. Beneath them, there was a nest of minotaurs, which meant this dungeon was way above D-rank difficulty. There was no way his companions hadn't noticed this yet. Finally, the dark entity inside our boy's heart confirmed that his shadow sense had grown stronger. Now he could sense what was hidden within that place. To our boy, it seemed obvious that the rich girl had also realized something was wrong and was hiding it for some reason. The bard approached her to say that the information they had about the Starlight Crystal must be correct, and that it was definitely further ahead. Right then, the cosplay girl called for our protagonist, which only made him more suspicious, since this place was extremely dangerous. As he approached her, the sinister aura surrounding her grew even stronger. Maybe she planned to use him as bait, or maybe she was just overly confident in her abilities. But as soon as he got close to her, the floor suddenly gave way and the two of them fell into a pit that seemed to have no end. Fortunately, they landed on their feet like cats, giving our protagonist the chance to take in the threat that was waiting for them. Several D-rank minotaurs were there, ready to slice them apart like meat in a butcher shop. Staying alert, our protagonist noticed that the cosplay girl was preparing to make her first move. She released a powerful aura and didn't seem frightened by the creature's presence at all. But after a few seconds, she began to look increasingly anxious. To our protagonist's surprise, she asked the minor to go first and face the creatures, promising to support him from behind. Our boy noticed how embarrassed she looked. The situation was so bizarre that she actually dropped to her knees, saying she didn't care about anything else but preferred the minor to go ahead. Completely shocked, our protagonist reminded her that she was a B-rank awakened. There was no way she shouldn't be able to deal with those creatures. Even so, she kept insisting. And now, completely desperate, with tears in her eyes, she promised to pay in 1 million Korean won. For someone who claimed to hate capitalism, our boy thought that sounded like a pretty good deal. After all, you don't make 1 million every day. Gripping his shadow dagger, he decided he could take on the job and charged into battle. The poor minotaurs rushed at him, hoping to bring him down. But then he realized something. The creatures weren't aiming at him at all. They were charging straight for the cosplay girl, who just stood there frozen. In that brief moment, panicked our protagonist. If she died there, he wouldn't get paid. Terrified by the presence of those creatures, the cosplay girl finally managed to summon an incredibly strong energy barrier. Our boy never imagined she'd be capable of doing something like that, especially after seeing the miserable state she was in. But now that she used her technique, one of the minotaurs tried to strike her with its axe. That's when our protagonist stepped in to save the day, cutting the creature down with one of the artifacts he had picked up from the first cave. Now he was ready to take revenge on those monsters. My God, if you look closely at this scene, our protagonist's eyes look completely unbalanced, almost feral. When he glanced at the cosplay girl, he realized she was already running away from the fight, as if terrified. But to our boy, that wasn't a problem at all. All he had to do was slice those monsters to pieces. Meanwhile, the girl ran down the corridor, desperately trying to find some safety. Panting heavily, she started to catch her breath, thinking she was finally free from danger, not realizing that evil was still closing in. She caught the stench of bull urine, and to her shock, she was cornered again. The monsters didn't fear her at all. Exhausted and terrified, there was nothing she could do now. Our protagonist knew she was capable of fighting back, but he couldn't understand why she kept running, shielding herself from every attack. She raised her hand toward her face, activating the power of an artifact she was carrying. That small bracelet created a large protective field around her, and once again the creature was repelled. But after that, the artifact shattered, and our boy realized she had been relying solely on that for survival. Approaching her once more, he figured out that she was an awakened fighter who wasn't specialized in combat. But having her secret exposed, she told him he couldn't tell anyone. And being the opportunist he was, he let her know that keeping secrets came with an additional price. What he couldn't figure out was why the creatures were still focusing only on the girl. That was extremely strange. Thanks to all the experience he had gained, our boy pushed his shadow sense to level 2, using it to scan the surroundings. The behavior of those creatures was completely off. They were following a mysterious sound, being controlled by someone. As he tried to defend both himself and the cosplay girl, she called out to him. No matter what they did, the creatures kept advancing, frantic and desperate to taste human flesh. And our boy realized this was a battle with no end in sight. What made it worse was that he couldn't use his most destructive skills because he had to protect the girl. She could get caught in the crossfire. But then he noticed that the mysterious figure seemed to be targeting the girl specifically, which could actually work to his advantage. Using the shadows as a tool, he decided to give that person exactly what they wanted. Walking toward the creatures after immobilizing them, he announced that the cosplay girl was completely defenseless, having already used up all her artifacts. It would be best not to let her get cornered. Hearing that, the girl felt a mix of embarrassment and fear. He shouldn't have said that out loud. As our boy charged back into battle, a dark presence approached the cosplay girl. The assassin thought a mere minor might ruin his entire plan, but now he had the chance to finish her off while she was completely unable to defend herself. Knife in hand, he was about to take her life, blaming the girl and her father for everything that had happened. But before he could finish the strike, his arm was cut clean off. Hopefully, he knows how to write with the other one. And to the surprise of absolutely no one, it turned out to be the bard from the cosplay girl's own team. The one whose flute playing was so bad it could make monsters' heads explode. He was the one behind everything that had been happening inside the dungeon. After being exposed, the bard started grinning like a maniac. Losing to a mere minor was driving him insane. Gathering all of his power, he made it clear he was far from being defeated. Lines of energy spread across the cave, absorbing and controlling the surrounding creatures. Then, radiating a violent aura, the bard prepared to unleash the true potential in Awaken who commands monsters. Our protagonist immediately realized that this guy had to be C rank, while the cosplay girl stood there in shock, amazed that he could absorb the life force of those creatures. At the same time, the entire area was becoming more dangerous. Molten lava began bubbling up through the cave floor. Our boy hadn't expected to face a C rank opponent. This was truly impressive and terrifying. Standing before them was a lava minotaur, a C rank monster that looked brutally powerful. The beast roared at them and charged to attack. Not wanting to die right there, our boy summoned his shadow barrier. But the impact was so devastating it almost destroyed the entire cave. Realizing his barrier had been partially shattered, our boy started to feel fear creeping in. Part of his skin had been scorched by the creature's attack, which left the cosplay girl deeply worried. This battle was definitely not going in their favor. Facing the danger, our boy grabbed her hand and told her to hold on tight. They immediately started running. The girl, confused and barely keeping up, was nearly struck by the creature's attack, but disaster was avoided thanks to our protagonist using his shadows to bind the raging monster. That bought them just enough time to make a break for it. Glancing over his shoulder, he told the cosplay girl to pay close attention. Once they reached the labyrinth, she needed to run straight ahead no matter what. Concerned, she asked what he planned to do, and he told her he had to hold the creature back and buy her time to escape. After all, he still wanted his payment. He silently wished for her to find a safe place to hide, promising he'd catch up with her soon. With her gone, our protagonist could now focus on the fight the way he wanted, determined to earn the easiest money of his life. Having fully transformed into the flaming minotaur, the bard was furious. He had no idea where his prey had gone. That's when our boy revealed himself, mocking the creature's foolish rage. Enraged, the monster swung its axe at him, desperate to find the cosplay girl. The strike crashed into the cave, sending out shockwaves of destruction. Our boy dodged and immediately countered, striking precise blows at the creature's joints. But then he felt a chill. His sword wasn't strong enough to pierce that armor. The bard laughed, saying our boy must be an idiot for trying to cut through stone with such a pathetic dagger. Infuriated, he swung again, splattering lava everywhere. Realizing this fight wouldn't go well if it stayed in that open space, our boy tried to lure the monster into the labyrinth. But the chase couldn't last forever, and the minotaur knew it. Our protagonist then called on the full power of the shadows, because no matter how strong an opponent might be, there was always a weak point. While he searched for that vulnerability, the minotaur bellowed that he was going to finish him. It closed in dangerously and launched a killing blow, but missed. Finally, our protagonist spotted it, the monster's weak point right on its back. He raised his sword, ready to deliver a devastating strike. But before he could land the blow, he was caught off guard again. The bard knew exactly what he was planning, and he wasn't about to let it happen so easily. After landing his last strike, our boy told the creature that none of its tricks would work anymore, though the sheer power of that monstrosity was still terrifying. Completely exhausted, he had to dodge the monster's next attack. Summoning a shadow dagger into his hand, he committed to his strategy, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The minotaur realized the boy wasn't going to run. That would just make killing him easier. Swinging its axe with brutal force, it mocked our boy's skills and the useless weapons he was using. Finally, our protagonist found an opening to attack its weak point. But something strange started happening on the monster's back, shocking him. That spot began radiating intense heat, forcing him to retreat. Nearly burned alive, he understood that even one arm, the bard was smart enough to protect his greatest weakness. The creature realized that its weak point had been discovered, but that wouldn't change anything. That spot was now burning at 2,000 degrees Celsius. It suggested that our boy tell it where the cosplay girl was hiding so it would spare his life, but our protagonist would never betray her. He refused to trust someone that vile. Angered by the confident rejection, the minotaur swore it would wipe him out completely. Determined to protect his pride, the monster charged at him again. Lee dodged and unleashed another shadow skill, throwing a chain toward the monster. It almost struck its face, but that miss seemed deliberate. He redirected the chain mid-air, sending it straight toward the creature's weak point, getting dangerously close to landing a hit. But the heat radiating from it was so intense that his blades couldn't hold their shape. Seeing this, the lava minotaur told him it was useless to keep trying and demanded that he stop playing foolish games. Dodging death once again, Lee realized his power was draining far too quickly. The longer the fight dragged on, the worse things were getting. For a moment, he considered asking for help, but immediately rejected the idea. He wasn't going to hand over his body to that dark entity ever again. Gaining the high ground over his opponent, he prepared himself. This was his chance to finish it and claim all that experience. He hurled himself downward like a projectile, shadow spear in hand, aiming right for the weak spot. He knew he couldn't waste this chance. As he got closer, his body caught fire, but he didn't stop. At last, he struck the weak point, and the creature let out a horrific scream of pain that sent it into a berserk frenzy, boosting its attack speed and critical damage. Severely wounded, the minotaur was now completely committed to killing him. But our boy had spent most of his stamina trying to end the fight and was badly hurt. The bard was shocked that the battle had even lasted this long. To him, our protagonist was just a minor. But he made it clear things wouldn't go any further. That was when our protagonist felt his heart pounding violently. For some inexplicable reason, dark energy was surging inside him, stronger than ever before. Then the entity finally spoke, saying that power had always been inside him, but his body had never been able to channel it properly. Thanks to this fight, he had unlocked a new form of his shadow ability. Even his wounds were completely healed. Watching this unfold, the minotaur was left speechless, unable to understand what had caused such a miraculous recovery. On top of that, the aura radiating from our boy was downright sinister. It had just become far more dangerous. Using every ounce of brain power it had left, the minotaur realized it couldn't allow our protagonist to fully recover. It tried to attack, but missed. Even with its speed buff, it was still slower than its opponent. That only made the minotaur more furious. All that power made no sense to it. Desperate to turn the fight in its favor, it decided to flood the arena with lava. The molten rock came surging toward our boy, and the minotaur began celebrating what it thought would be its victory. Only then did it realize something had gone horribly wrong. Our boy was standing unharmed on top of the molten stone. At last, he understood what his shadow enhancement truly was, and now the heat the minotaur generated no longer intimidated him. Having tried everything, the creature felt fear for the very first time. Now it was our boy's turn to take control of the fight. Far stronger than before, he charged forward with full confidence, determined to finish this quickly. His shadow dagger was so powerful now that it sliced through stone as if it were butter. The bard realized, too late, that he just lost another arm. which only made him more enraged. He tried to counterattack, but thanks to our boy's boosted power, he lost his other arm as well, a brutal demonstration of how things would go from now on. Still not out of tricks, the lava minotaur regenerated new arms made of molten rock. As long as there was lava in the area, it could heal indefinitely, meaning our boy's attacks would be useless. But hearing that only made our protagonist grin. Now he could put that regeneration to the test, especially since he could feel the minotaur's power gradually weakening. Anger that the boy had noticed, the creature attacked once more. But before it could even finish its first swing, its arms were shattered again. Knowing defeat was coming, it kept trying to fight until its regeneration began to fail. Now it had stubby, deformed arms. That's when our protagonist told it that it had reached its limit and should just give up. Completely terrified, the bard begged him to reconsider. There was no need for them to fight to the death. But our boy replied that this was exactly what he wanted. After all, he was getting paid $1 million. Since this was now about money, the Minotaur tried to negotiate, saying that if the girl was handed over once they got back to the city, he'd pay $5 million. But our boy was sure it was a trap. There was no guarantee the Minotaur wouldn't come after him for revenge later. Desperate, the bard kept trying to convince him that trusting him was the smart choice, even after trying to kill him for multiple chapters. But our protagonist, ever the clever one, had a better idea. Maybe it would be smarter to hand the traitor over to the cosplay girl. That way, he'd make even more money from the fight and build a stronger connection with her family, which was worth more than any payment. The Minotaur knew that if it were captured, it would be tortured to death, and even its family would pay the price. If that was the only outcome left, it was willing to fight a little longer. It pulled out a mysterious artifact, shocking even the shadow entity who couldn't understand how the Minotaur had gotten a fragment of the gate. If that artifact was destroyed, this entire dimension would be cut off from the outside world, trapping them there forever. The Minotaur said it had no other choice. But before it could destroy the artifact, our boy managed to snatch it right out of its hands. Not only that, he got close enough to its weak point one more time, and after driving his weapon into it, the Minotaur let out an agonized scream. The monster's body was completely disintegrating, pierced through by our boy's shadows until it was finally defeated. From its remains, an energy stone emerged. Our boy noticed that the Minotaurs they fought earlier hadn't dropped any stones, all of them had been with the bard. Absorbing them gave him even more mastery over his shadow abilities. But then the entire place began to shake. The shadow entity warned him that the creature's power had been what kept the labyrinth stable. Outside the portal, people were waiting. No one had expected the dungeon to be this dangerous. And look at that. It seemed everyone had made it out alive. There was the cosplay girl, talking to our boy. Now that everyone was safe, he said he had no plans to join any organization and asked her to keep quiet about the abilities she had seen him use. She agreed since she also had secrets of her own to protect. Then she finally paid him. After receiving the money, he remembered something else and showed her the massive sword, asking if it could be sold somewhere. Examining the weapon carefully, the cosplay girl said there was no energy fluctuation coming from it, but the material itself was excellent. Even so, she explained that the item would have to be appraised by experts. So our protagonist left the sword with her, hoping she would get back to him with news. Now he knew exactly who he would sell his future loot to, and he hoped she'd be generous, unlike that mob boss at the black market. Back home, he asked the shadow entity what the fragment he had taken from the Minotaur really was. The entity explained that the more of those artifacts he gathered, the easier it would be to reach S-rank power. That made him very tempted. Looking at the object, the entity also noted that if those things were resurfacing, it meant those bastards were at work again, which meant it had to speed up its recovery. And the key to that recovery was the boy himself. Eventually, he would have to face forces far beyond human understanding. The entity didn't know whether to warn the kid now or let him find out on his own. Either way, what mattered most was that he had to get stronger immediately. Determined to power up, our boy went to another portal, one guarded by fighters ranked between B and C. With his current strength, getting through would be difficult, but he wanted to know the truth. Even the shadow entity was curious about what might be inside that E-rank portal. Our protagonist was determined to go through it to uncover the truth behind his parents' deaths. When it had all happened, he'd been given a token amount of compensation by the company they worked for, just a workplace accident payout. The company manager had the nerve to ask him if he didn't think the amount was enough. But all our boy ever wanted was the truth. Grabbing the man by the head, he was told again that it had been an accident. His parents had been minors. That was the end of the story. But our protagonist refused to believe it because he knew his parents were C-rank awakened. There was no way they had died like that. He was convinced they were still alive somewhere inside that portal. After venting his anger, one of the manager's bodyguards grabbed him, warning him that portals were dangerous. But to our boy, it made no sense for something so cruel to happen inside an E-rank portal. He was certain the truth was being hidden. When he kept causing a scene, the man was about to smash his teeth in. But the attack was stopped by the arrival of a powerful businessman, one who was also an A-rank awakened. He was the president of the company and clearly disappointed with his subordinate. He told him he should treat the families of those who lost loved ones with more professionalism. Turning to our boy and speaking politely, he asked him to accept the money, knowing full well the amount wasn't enough for him to restart his life, but still wishing him the best. Knowing that he wanted the truth as well, the company president promised they would investigate what had happened. That sparked a little hope in our boy's heart, but eventually they decided to blame his parents for the failure at work. This ended up leaving him with a massive debt. Since they had an important mission ahead, the dark entity told him he needed power if he truly wanted to achieve what he desired. Instead of standing around doing nothing, he should gather more portal fragments to grow stronger. Only then could he accomplish his goals. Our boy said he already knew that, but since shadow energy couldn't be detected, he was still classified as E rank, which made his life extremely difficult. The strange part of their relationship was that the entity helped him, but at the same time wanted to take his body for itself. After Lee spent some time thinking absurd things, the entity grew furious, saying it had had enough of his nonsense. But to our boy, it just sounded like a childish tantrum, which only annoyed the entity further. While they were arguing, Lee noticed a message arrive on his phone, an invitation to join a mission. He then headed to a portal in the city's industrial zone. This one was ranked D. Unfortunately, he arrived a little late. Once there, he ran into an old work colleague. It had been a long time since they last saw each other, and they seemed to have a friendly relationship. It had been 5 years since the accident involving his parents. The other mercenaries waiting there had expected someone important to show up, but when they saw it was just a miner, they immediately began to look down on him. Back to the mission briefing, the mercenaries asked what the objective was. They were told they needed to find ice crystals, minerals, and other samples, a total of 60 kilograms worth. Our boy overheard that the area was off limits and that the size of the team felt like overkill. Sensing the hostility from the others, Lee realized this wasn't going to be easy. There was even another C rank present. Everyone in that unusual team was being watched by a suspicious man who seemed eager to play with them. He was the second in command of the Lone Shark gang and was clearly preparing to commit atrocities. While walking alongside his old colleague, our protagonist was asked if he no longer needed a protective suit. He told the older man that he was now awakened. This surprised the mercenaries. A miner who was also an awakened fighter wasn't something they saw every day. Hearing some of them muttering insults, his old colleague stepped in and made it clear he didn't agree with their nonsense. As they moved through the area, our boy noticed that the vegetation seemed to have been intentionally altered to make hiding easier, and he felt something sinister about the place. While thinking about this, something happened in the blink of an eye. But our boy pretended nothing had happened, though he was sure the mercenaries had noticed it too. Someone was watching them from within the forest. His thoughts were cut off when one of the bald mercenaries barked at the miners to pick up the pace, which gave our protagonist the perfect chance. Since the terrain was uneven and full of foliage, he could use it to slip away from the mercenaries and figure out what was really going on. So he told his companion to hold his hand tightly. They had something to take care of. Right after that, our boy took off running, and his speed was so impressive that the mercenaries started questioning whether a miner should even be able to move like that. None of them even bothered to follow. In their minds, those two were just trash who would die without their protection anyway. Meanwhile, the sinister man from the Lone Shark gang was carefully watching his victims. He was finally ready to unleash his atrocities. Then one of the mercenaries admitted he had the feeling they were being watched, but their leader dismissed him, saying the bald guy was just being paranoid. The truth was that another of their companions had felt the same way ever since they entered the area. The place gave off an eerie vibe. Trying to convince the others, he suggested they go back to the safety of the outside world. But while they were talking, something horrifying happened right in front of them. The bald one was suddenly captured by a technique that struck instantly. Their stalker finally revealed himself, and he had no intention of letting his prey scatter. It was the blood leopard. Knowing danger was imminent and seeing that their comrade was still alive, the mercenaries tried to save him, which only made the blood leopard angrier. In an instant, he ended the bald man's life. The other two were enraged after seeing what had happened. One of them charged at the attacker, but his arm was caught, and in the next moment his whole body was immobilized by threads of blood. There was nothing the mercenary could do. The blood threads sliced him apart, turning him into pieces like a human puzzle. The last surviving mercenary was terrified and ran for his life, which only brought the blood leopard more joy. Far from there, our protagonist was sitting with his coworker, suggesting they rest for a bit. While talking, he asked the old man if he had made any powerful enemies, but the truth was, the man was just an ordinary worker. He didn't even have the chance to make enemies like that. Only then did our protagonist reveal that this wasn't a mission at all. It was a death trap. Someone wanted to make sure none of them ever returned. Hearing that shocked the old man. At that moment, the last surviving mercenary arrived. He confronted our boy, accusing him of realizing there was danger but doing nothing about it, which led to the deaths of his comrades. At least he wasn't completely useless, our boy thought. Now that his brothers had been sacrificed, he finally understood that someone was hunting them. Our protagonist even made it clear that this mercenary's life was about to end. Not understanding what he meant, the mercenary suddenly noticed blood threads surrounding his body, and the blood leopard was impressed that a mere miner could have such sharp perception. That was thanks to our boy using his shadow sense. The blood leopard moved closer to our protagonist. Terrified, the mercenary begged him not to harm them, saying they were just small fry. The killer replied that he had no personal grudge against the miner, but he made it clear that the old man talked too much, and a few days ago, he had let slip some important information. With his abilities, our protagonist had already analyzed exactly what this man was capable of. Desperate, the old miner swore he would take the secret to his grave, and that he hadn't told a soul. But with a threatening gleam in his eyes, the blood leopard bared his claws. In seconds, he struck the poor old man, saying that dead men tell no tales. That sent our protagonist into a rage, and he charged forward, wielding his shadow daggers. The fight between them finally began, and the blood leopard hadn't expected to find someone this skilled in a place like this. Knowing what our boy had done back at the black market, the assassin made it clear that this time, things would end differently. With a single strike of his claws, he tore up the ground beneath them, leaving deep scars in the forest floor. Thinking our boy must be trying to end his own life in the most painful way possible, the blood leopard was happy to oblige. He unleashed a series of devastating strikes at him, none of which managed to kill, though a few left shallow wounds. It was then that Lee realized not even his shadow reinforcement was enough to completely block those attacks. The blood leopard noticed his opponent was losing focus and used the opening to slam him into a tree, leaving him slightly injured. Knowing this fight was only getting more dangerous, our boy called out for the old man to get close to him quickly. He also understood that getting into a close-quarters brawl with this monster was far too risky. The blood leopard promised that both of them would die before the day was over. But our protagonist, activating his shadow sense at its peak, was determined to prove him wrong. He threw several energy daggers at his enemy, but every single one was blocked with ease. Of course, that had just been a diversion. He was looking for the chance to catch the blood leopard off guard. And the killer noticed that this boy still had more tricks hidden up his sleeve. But with a simple motion of his hands, he shattered the energy weapon and mocked him, reminding him that he was still just an E rank. Right then, he was interrupted. The old man had emerged from the ground near the assassin's feet, using some kind of trap. But the blood leopard allowed himself to be caught. He already knew what was happening and didn't feel threatened in the slightest. Close quarters combat was his specialty, after all. Before the old man could even react, the blood leopard had wrapped him up in blood threads and shredded him where he stood. Our protagonist hadn't expected things to end like that. Wait, hold on. It wasn't the old man. It was some other guy. God rest his soul. Now our protagonist was fleeing with the old man at his side, and of course the blood leopard wasn't about to just let them escape. Luckily, they managed to get away and find a somewhat safer spot where they could treat the old man's wounds. Curious, our boy asked him what the hell he had done to get the blood leopard after him. Nervously, the old man revealed something completely shocking. He had discovered the truth behind the death of our protagonist's parents. That bit of information immediately put our boy in serious mode. Now he was overflowing with power and rage. And remember, rage has incredible synergy with the power of shadows. Perfect time for some good old-fashioned violence. Eager for answers, our protagonist bombarded the old man with questions. He needed to know what he had uncovered. Then, hold up, why was the guy not wearing his mask inside a dungeon? For God's sake, don't do that. If he took off his mask, he could die. This whole place was radioactive. Anyway, the old man said that at first he wasn't sure, but now that the blood leopard had come to kill him, he had the proof he needed. Before the incident at the mine, he had overheard our boy's father talking about how the company manager was running dangerous experiments in that area. And just a few days later, something went terribly wrong, and our boy's parents were the ones blamed for it. Furious, the boy demanded to know why the old man hadn't spoken up back then. Regretful, the old man admitted he had failed, but said that at the end of the day, he was just a miner. He couldn't afford to lose his job, he had a family to feed too. Our protagonist, Seething, couldn't believe the old man had let his parents suffer under false accusations, and the old man truly regretted it, carrying that guilt with him all these years. Their conversation was cut short when the blood leopard found them again, determined to take their lives. The problem was, our boy was furious. But before he could act, the old man was captured. As he was being killed, he apologized to our protagonist, saying he just didn't want to be hated by him. Finally, the blood leopard recognized familiar features in our boy's face, realizing he was the son of those C-rank miners, and told him he'd soon be joining them. The two clashed, trading blows. This time, however, our protagonist was fueled by hatred. Even so, he was still being pushed back by his opponent. The sociopath known as the blood leopard was enjoying every second of it. Clearly, someone twisted in the head. Our poor boy was about to be beaten senseless, so he decided to pull out one of the massive swords he had found in that first dungeon. For the first time, he managed to slice through the blood leopard's threads of blood. At last, the fight fell even, and the villain didn't like that at all. He thrived on having the upper hand. Unfortunately, our protagonist was close to his limit. He didn't have much strength left to swing that enormous sword. The blood leopard realized his last attack had been just a bluff and immediately struck, binding him again with blood threads. Now completely tied up and captured, there was nothing our boy could do. But his silence unnerved the blood leopard. It felt like the boy was plotting something. And if that was the case, the villain was actually excited. He loved seeing that kind of fire in his victim's eyes. He decided to share a little secret with him. He told him that his parents hadn't died in some accidental cave-in at the mine. It was him, the blood leopard, who had killed them in cold blood. That revelation poured fuel on the hatred already burning inside our boy. According to the villain, it was the same look his father had given him in his final moments after watching his wife die. Then the bastard started describing in detail how he had slaughtered our protagonist's parents, and it was utterly vile. But then the villain noticed something. The blood threads he had summoned were burning away completely. A massive power was erupting from our protagonist's body as his fury reached its peak. He took deliberate, heavy steps toward his enemy. Behind him, the dark shadow entity manifested, looming over him. Fueled by sheer rage, our boy swore he would end this bastard's life. Only then did the blood leopard realize that our protagonist could fuel his powers with hatred itself. And indeed, the emotion was so strong that his strength was being fully recalibrated, ascending to the next stage of violence. The blood leopard had no idea how the boy's injuries had healed, but it didn't scare him. He liked it when his prey provided a little entertainment before being killed. But our protagonist no longer felt like the prey here. Quite the opposite. In the shadow dimension, he was now the hunter. In the blink of an eye, he appeared behind the villain. The blood leopard had no idea how his victim had gotten that strong so suddenly, and it infuriated him. He tried to strike our boy, but his speed was nowhere near enough to match him. This time, our protagonist hurled several shadow daggers at the bastard, and the blood leopard managed to block them all. Now, with more refined abilities, our boy used shadow teleportation, a highly efficient move, and nearly caught the blood leopard off guard. Since he had closed much of the distance between them, he went for a strike, but unfortunately, his attack was blocked by the villain's blood threads. The blood leopard still believed himself untouchable, but then he realized the boy had vanished. It had been nothing more than a feint. Our protagonist hadn't been aiming for his defenses at all. The enemy's biggest weakness was that his reaction speed was slower than the speed at which the boy could reposition and attack. And for the first time in the entire fight, our boy managed to land solid blows on the bastard's flesh. The blood leopard, now badly wounded, couldn't believe what had just happened. Collapsing to his knees, he couldn't comprehend how he was losing to a mere child. In the final moments of his life, our protagonist gave him a chance to confess what had really happened in that mine 5 years ago. The blood leopard, furious, told our boy to shove it somewhere the sun doesn't shine. After that bit of defiance, a strike came, and the blood leopard lost an arm. Poor guy was going to have to learn to write with the other hand. He howled in pain, and our protagonist actually seemed to enjoy it. He made it clear his patience had run out and hinted that he might start carving him up in other places if he didn't talk. Defeated, the blood leopard admitted that it made no difference whether he told the truth or not. The blame lay with the company's higher-ups and with the boy's father, who had discovered something he shouldn't have. But thanks to that confession, our protagonist finally had a name. Choi. Just another generic Chinese-sounding name that he might not even remember later. Maybe the president, maybe that pompous manager. But most likely, it was the company's president. After revealing that information, the blood leopard warned that the boy would now have to fight the entire company, and he clearly didn't have the strength to do that yet. Then he tried to bargain, asking to be spared. But he was too late. His head was already gone. Our boy wasn't going to forgive anyone involved in what happened to his parents. Back in the real world, the rain was pouring down as our protagonist went to the company headquarters where his parents used to work. There, he identified the name the blood leopard had given him. It belonged to a man with a mustache who seemed highly influential there. The shadow entity that accompanied our boy knew he had already reached C rank, but warned him not to throw his life away. After all, there was an A rank awakened in the area, and our boy could definitely sense it too. On top of that, the company's founder was also an A rank awakened, and he was right there in the car. Yes, our protagonist was filled with hatred, but he was rational. He wasn't about to attack recklessly. Besides, the blood leopard's words couldn't be taken as absolute truth. He was a man of questionable character. Our protagonist needed to investigate further and figure out whether the founder had acted alone, or if there were even bigger players behind it all. And that was what worried him. But one thing he was sure of, a debt of blood would be repaid with blood. He followed the car and ended up in an area of the warehouse. Inside were several loan sharks from the blood leopard's organization. It looked like the shipment they were receiving was something very delicate. The company president wanted to know if the old miner was really dead. The loan shark boss reported that they had lost contact with the blood leopard and that the portal fragment he used to infiltrate had also disappeared. Because of that, they couldn't confirm what had happened with the mission. This made the company president very uneasy. He had no idea what could be unfolding now. As for the loan shark leader, he figured the blood leopard might have acted recklessly. From this point on, the man who seemed to own the company would be called Mustache. Knowing the plan still had to move forward, Mustache ordered that the equipment be moved to the proper area. They were at a critical stage of their experiments, and mistakes couldn't be tolerated. The loan shark boss asked if the money was ready to be collected. Meanwhile, our protagonist had successfully infiltrated the warehouse and was listening to everything. It seemed he had just confirmed that Mustache was indeed involved in his parents' deaths. The leader of the loan sharks suddenly felt the murderous intent radiating from our boy and immediately attacked the spot where he was hiding. That made Mustache even more worried, but the loan shark boss couldn't find anything. He started to think it might have just been his imagination, though he was certain he had felt a chilling killing intent. Our boy had barely managed to hide himself with the power of the shadows, and he breathed a sigh of relief. He had almost been discovered. The next day, life went on as normal. Our protagonist went to the company's headquarters, and the shadow entity asked if he really should be there instead of looking for missions to take. He had gone there to locate the third fragment, and he also wanted to find out how much the weapon he had taken from the shadow dungeon was worth. Wait a second. This building was actually owned by Cosplay's family. Inside the reception hall, a secretary greeted him, and our boy asked to see Cosplay. She asked if he had an appointment, and it looked like there was a couple standing just behind him. For absolutely no reason, the girl decided to humiliate our protagonist, saying he was a very bold minor for daring to ask to see Miss Cosplay. It seemed they only said that to stroke their own egos just to humiliate someone. Our boy was furious and asked if this was really how they treated guests here. Then the man with her, who was clearly just as obnoxious, said that our boy was nothing but a dog, not a guest. Finally, our protagonist realized that everyone in that family was unbearably arrogant, and that there was no point in trying to maintain contact with Miss Cosplay. So he told them he was leaving since he didn't like how he was being treated. Seeing how defiant our boy was, the arrogant man ordered his bodyguards to cripple him. But our protagonist instantly used Shadow Step. Not only did he take down the bodyguards, but he grabbed the arrogant guy by the neck. The whole scene flipped instantly. Now the girl was terrified. She warned that if our boy laid a finger on him, he would be hunted for the rest of his life. Our boy threw the fool's body at the conceited woman so they could both learn a lesson, making it clear that he was sparing their lives only because he was an acquaintance of Miss Cosplay. But here's the funny thing. People love humiliating others, but the moment they get humiliated back, suddenly they get all proud and self-righteous. Now that guy was fuming, burning with anger, desperate to strike back at our protagonist. He lunged at him with murderous intent, not realizing our boy's hand was already cloaked in shadows. The fight between the two was about to get intense when someone finally decided to step in. Thank God, someone with a bit of common sense. Miss Cosplay finally showed up, asking why our protagonist was causing trouble at her family's company headquarters. With the fight interrupted, the arrogant guy told our protagonist that he was a dead man, that he'd never be forgiven by his sister, Miss Cosplay. But she immediately ordered for him to be thrown out of the building. That was when the jerk realized he really did have her support, but to his surprise, a man grabbed him by the collar. Turns out he wasn't even her brother, just a distant cousin. Well, that was it. He was done for. His girlfriend tried to claim that the minor was just a poor, low-class nobody, spewing a whole load of nonsense to justify humiliating him. But Miss Cosplay made it clear that our protagonist was her friend. She also ordered that all the guards who had obeyed the arrogant jerk be fired and blacklisted from ever working for the company again. Poor guys? No, they had it coming. Now they were the ones being thrown out like trash. Miss Cosplay was furious that her family name had been used by such conceited fools, warning them that if it happened again, it wouldn't be forgiven. With the situation resolved, she went over to our protagonist. She hadn't expected him to find her so soon and suggested they go somewhere private to talk. She apologized for what he had just witnessed, since the entire scene had been embarrassing. And as they were walking, an employee from the company informed her that the president wanted to meet with her. Miss Cosplay apologized to our boy, asking him to wait just a few minutes, promising she'd be right back. She seemed anxious about the meeting, but the employee said the president hadn't mentioned anything, only that she should come at once. While our protagonist waited alone in that room, someone entered, radiating a crushing amount of power. It was an old man who wanted to know what exactly our protagonist was. By the look of things, this man had to be the company president and supposedly Miss Cosplay's father. Using his ability, our protagonist realized that this man was an A-rank awakened with two very powerful skills. Trying to stay calm and reasonable, our boy said there must be some misunderstanding, that he was just a minor. But he quickly noticed he was under a mental attack. The old man saw that his intimidation wasn't creating any fear in the boy's heart, and that intrigued him. Unleashing his overwhelming power, he seemed unwilling to believe the minor's explanation, throwing bolts of lightning at the boy. But to his surprise, our protagonist blocked the attack flawlessly. That was enough to make the president think the boy must be at least B-rank, which was hard to believe for someone who claimed to be just a minor. What really worried him, though, was the thought that the boy might be using a fake identity to get close to Miss Cosplay. He pressed him to confess the truth before things got more complicated. But the whole interrogation was cut short when Miss Cosplay appeared, realizing her father had tricked her just to interrogate one of her friends. Completely embarrassed, the president was dragged away by the ear by his own daughter, while our protagonist just stood there watching, not sure what to say. It really was bizarre to think that the president of this company could be so submissive to his own daughter. Miss Cosplay apologized, explaining that her father was an extremely cautious man who suspected everyone all the time, and our protagonist actually understood that. It seemed like the man was just worried about his daughter being tricked by idiots. That very obvious piece of information somehow surprised the girl, and now she believed that our protagonist genuinely understood her father on a deep level. Outside the room, the company president was glaring through the glass with murderous intent. His precious daughter was getting closer to someone he didn't know, and he hated that. Miss Cosplay, annoyed, told her father to leave because he was only getting in the way. Finally, she and our protagonist were able to sit down and talk. She handed him 5 million, apparently the amount she got for the sword he had given her. Then our protagonist showed her the portal fragment and asked if she knew where he could find more of them. She explained that these fragments used to be more common, but lately someone had been buying them in large quantities, making them very rare. She suggested that he try an auction house, as one might show up there eventually. The shadow entity didn't like hearing that someone was collecting those artifacts. That could mean one of its deadliest enemies was involved. Meanwhile, the same masked man who had stepped in during the fight with the arrogant cousin was now investigating our protagonist's records. They were analyzing his data carefully. After all, he had gone from E rank to C rank in just a few days. As they read through his file, the important man received a call. On the other end of the line was someone very interested in the sword Miss Cosplay had brought back last time. But the old man had no idea how she had gotten that weapon. The man on the phone made it clear that if there were more of those artifacts, he would buy every last one of them. That made the old man stop and think. He asked why the buyer was so excited and if the sword had some kind of hidden ability. The buyer couldn't say much, only that the material the sword was made from could completely change that nation's military power. Now the old man was more thoughtful than ever. Our protagonist's background was mysterious, and on top of that, he had given his daughter extremely valuable weapons. Walking through the auction house building, our protagonist noticed there were many items stored there. He thought he might even find more fragments, but to his surprise, he ran into that same despicable couple he had met at the black market. The arrogant man recognized him immediately and wondered why the blood leopard hadn't taken care of him yet. Trying to provoke him, he asked what a mere miner was doing in a place like this. Our protagonist said his memory must be terrible, and with a bit of his power leaking out, he asked if the man had already forgotten what it felt like to be slapped around by him. That was enough to scare him, and he begged our boy not to come any closer. But in his panic, he bumped into someone else, the leader of the loan sharks. This man told the arrogant fool that his behavior was an insult to their entire gang. Then, approaching our protagonist, the leader said that humiliating one of his subordinates was the same as humiliating his entire organization, and he tried to crush our boy with his power, forcing him down to his knees. But our boy's feet stayed planted, cracking the floor under all that pressure. He told the loan shark boss that if he wanted him to kneel, he must be dreaming. The two of them just stood there locked in that pointless contest of strength, while the arrogant fool on the side was sure our protagonist would eventually crumble under the boss's power. That's when Miss Cosplay appeared to break things up, and the loan shark boss immediately stopped bothering our boy. After all, if he wanted trouble, he could easily get it by crossing her family, and that was a line he wouldn't dare cross. Right away, the boss ignored what he was doing and apologized to Miss Cosplay, since they were all just there to buy things at the auction. Miss Cosplay then walked over to our protagonist and asked if he was okay, and he told her he was fine. He handled that pressure without any lasting effects. Once they were away from the crowd, the loan shark boss demanded to know the story between our boy and that arrogant idiot. The fool confessed that he lost a very valuable sword in a fight with our protagonist and had asked the blood leopard to deal with him. That revelation made the loan shark boss furious. The idiot was a true liability. And while they were having their little moment of reflection, Mustache, the man responsible for the company that killed our protagonist's parents, showed up as well. Through the conversation, the loan shark boss realized our protagonist had been involved in the blood leopard's last mission. Now he was wondering how this boy was even still alive. There was a small chance that the blood leopard had actually been killed by him, but to the arrogant idiot, that was impossible, since the miner was supposedly just E rank. Even from a distance, our protagonist had to focus all his rage just to stop himself from unleashing that dark killing intent. Looking at Mustache face to face made it nearly impossible to keep calm. On the other side, the company president was shocked at how much the boy had grown in the last 5 years. Now he wanted to know how the kid had managed to get close to Miss Cosplay, someone connected to such a powerful corporate family. Walking alongside her, our boy asked what she was doing at the auction house, and she explained that her father wanted to meet him. Worried, he asked if they were going to fight again. He didn't want that, but Miss Cosplay assured him her father would never try anything like that while she was present. Their talk was cut short when Mustache showed up, clearly not expecting to see our protagonist there. Trying to end the conversation quickly, our boy said he was just a humble miner working to pay off his debts, with no interest in mingling with society's elites. Mustache replied that what happened to the boy's parents had been a decision made by the company board. He even claimed he'd wanted to help but had been outvoted. To our protagonist, Mustache was just washing his hands of all responsibility. He knew exactly what happened that day. The old miner, his friend who had already passed away, had left a message for them, and our boy quoted a Chinese saying, basically meaning, "Things are about to get really ugly." After hearing that, the Black Panther said our boy needed to be taught a lesson, but Mustache stopped him, since they were in neutral territory. Even so, they all agreed. The boy knew too much. Someone would have to be sent to eliminate him. That comment put a big smile on Black Panther's face, and finally Miss Cosplay took our protagonist to meet her father, just as the auction was about to begin. Then Miss Cosplay's father said he wanted a quick word with our boy. Curious, our protagonist asked what exactly this old man wanted to talk about. Getting straight to the point, the old man asked if he still had more of those weapons he'd asked his daughter to sell. Our protagonist realized he must be very interested. Since he still has a good number of them, he decided he would hand them over little by little. That way the price stays sky high. He told the old man that he still had 2 in storage. Then came the crazy offer. Miss Cosplay's father wanted to pay $45 million for them. Our protagonist definitely thought that was an interesting offer, but made it clear that he's just a minor and that something like this is basically life-changing. Knowing the true value of what he has, he said he wanted $25 million for each sword. After hearing that counteroffer, the old man was completely speechless. He was already starting to think our boy was getting a bit too bold with this aggressive bargaining. But before things could get out of hand, Miss Cosplay reeled her father in again, and he reluctantly agreed to our protagonist's terms. After coughing up that massive amount of money, Miss Cosplay told our boy that the item he wanted should be up for auction any moment now. The little artifact had already hit 6.5 million and was still climbing, reaching 15 million within seconds. Our protagonist realized that the fragments he's been looking for really are in this auction house, and now he's got 70 million to spend. To everyone's shock, he immediately placed a bid of 30 million, making it clear he wasn't backing down. Nearby, Mustache and Black Panther couldn't figure out why he was doing this. To test him, Mustache placed a bid of 50 million, wanting to know just how much money our boy actually had. Willing to burn through everything he just earned, our protagonist raised it to 60 million. Right behind him, Miss Cosplay's father said that fragment wasn't worth anywhere near that much, suggesting he stop throwing out ridiculous bids or he'd just waste all the money he had just gotten. Miss Cosplay agreed, realizing that Mustache was intentionally driving the price up. But our protagonist wasn't sure if Mustache actually wanted the item or was just messing with him, so he decided to dig in and resist. Standing next to Miss Cosplay, he asked who really had the deeper pockets, her family's company or Mustache's. Looks like our boy knows exactly how to stir things up. After hearing that, the old man proudly claimed that his company was much richer than Mustache's. Meanwhile, the bid for the fragment our protagonist wants had already reached 70 million. So he showed the old man a few more swords. The man said he'd buy them for the same price as before, but warned our boy that even with that, it might still not be enough to compete against Mustache's company. Our protagonist told him not to worry. At that moment, the old man started suspecting that our protagonist might have way more swords than he'd admitted. This annoyed Miss Cosplay, who told her father not to question our protagonist's word. Once again, her father agreed to buy another 70 million worth of swords. It finally clicked for Miss Cosplay. She understood our boy's strategy. He had to act fast for Mustache would win the fragment. So our protagonist went all in and placed a 100 million bid. Mustache knew those fragments were essential for his company's secret project, so he immediately countered with 200 million. Within moments, the price skyrocketed to 500 million, leaving everyone in the auction house stunned at this insane bidding war. Black Panther immediately realized that our protagonist was becoming a serious obstacle in their path. Taking a decisive step, Mustache placed a bid of 1 billion. The entire audience went silent. That's an absurd amount of money. Miss Cosplay could tell that Mustache was willing to turn this into a battle of wealth. Now our protagonist was even more suspicious of him. Behind him, Miss Cosplay's father was clearly uneasy. He wasn't sure if our protagonist could really deliver enough weapons to pay for such a massive sum. Miss Cosplay made it clear that if there was any loss, she would cover it herself and told her father to stop distracting him so he could focus. Then our protagonist raised the bid to 2 billion, completely skyrocketing the fragment's value. On the other side, Mustache was furious. He never wanted to spend that much money on a single fragment. Even Black Panther was shocked, unsure how our protagonist could even have that kind of capital. Mustache believed there was only one possible source for that money, Miss Cosplay's family company, which only made him angrier. Since no one else placed a higher bid, the auctioneer's gavel came down and our protagonist won the fragment at a heavily inflated price. For him, it was a victory nonetheless. Miss Cosplay, who loves watching arrogant people get humiliated, celebrated his win with genuine excitement. Right after, her father reminded everyone of the most important detail. Someone actually had to pay the 2 billion. At that rate, our protagonist would have to deliver 70 swords to settle the debt, and the old man was starting to question whether our protagonist could really produce them. But our protagonist calmly explained that rare items are incredibly valuable, and a deal of this scale can't be calculated the same way. Then he snapped his fingers and revealed 100 swords at once, asking if the debt was considered settled now. That stunned everyone. Miss Cosplay's father was deeply impressed and even started thinking about recruiting him into his organization. Afterward, Miss Cosplay got closer to our boy and asked him to let her know if anything interesting happened in the future. This made her father very nervous. He could tell our protagonist might be getting too close to his daughter. They headed to the auction house's payment area so he could receive the fragment. Before leaving, the old man gave our protagonist some advice. His methods might be unconventional, but Mustache's company was equally formidable, and you should be careful. Sometimes it's better to join forces with people who share the same goals, so those goals can actually be achieved. He suggested our protagonist contact him again soon. Meanwhile, Black Panther was on the phone. Knowing that the old man and Miss Cosplay had already left the building, he reported that it would be our protagonist personally picking up the fragment, Mustache. Told him to wait until the place was emptier. They couldn't risk making a mess. Black Panther promised that this time he would bring skilled fighters and nothing would go wrong. Walking through the city streets, our protagonist realized the old man had gathered a lot of information about him. Forming an alliance could be useful, as long as he didn't end up under the old man's thumb. The shadow entity reminded him that if he gathered enough fragments, he would eventually reach S rank. But it seemed our protagonist wasn't entirely convinced. Still, he told the entity he was doing everything he could to get stronger. Since the entity could read his thoughts, it knew he still doubted that narrative and thought S rank was far out of reach. While they were talking, something caught his attention. His apartment building was on fire. People were fleeing in panic as the blaze spread, and the whole situation was dangerously chaotic. In the middle of the confusion, our boy's phone started ringing. Answering the phone, our boy was told that the Black Panther was already making strategic moves against him. The recommendation was for him to hide for now since they couldn't guarantee his safety. But our protagonist was already surrounded by the Black Panther's henchmen. Among them was that same idiot who had tried to pick a fight with him back at the black market. Fueled by anger, our protagonist glared at those thugs, fully prepared to cause some real chaos right in the middle of the city. But those lowlifes were still convinced they'd easily win this fight. With complete confidence, our protagonist told them that even the Blood Leopard hadn't been able to do what they were trying to pull off now. That line shook them a bit, making them wonder if he was hiding some kind of trump card. But since they had a job to do, the first of them lunged, trying to catch our protagonist from behind with his blade. The only thing he managed to cut was the ground, because our boy had already used the shadows to move, showing off his incredible skill. He struck the poor fool from behind, which shocked the rest of the gang even more. That wasn't supposed to happen, at least not that easily. While the clueless lackeys were scrambling to figure out how to handle him, the coward tried to run away. But within seconds, those goons were turned into a human jigsaw puzzle, giving our protagonist the perfect chance to grab the coward. Now was time for something a little more entertaining. The fool realized his life might be about to end in the most brutal way. As our protagonist beat him down, the guy kept screaming that the director and the Black Panther wouldn't let him get away with this, but the threats didn't work. The guy was hurled straight into the flames, consuming our protagonist's apartment. Just a few seconds later, Miss Cosplay showed up with her loyal bodyguard to rescue him. Standing by his side, she was deeply worried about his condition, but he was fine. Now that he had become a direct target of the Black Panther, she asked what he planned to do next. Our protagonist made it clear he was going to strike back. Seeing how determined he was, Miss Cosplay said she would support him in whatever was needed, though he wasn't sure why she was getting so involved. That's when she revealed that she had been harassed by the Black Panther as well, and now he had gone as far as targeting one of her few friends. She made sure he knew just how rare that was, saying it in a way that felt almost suspiciously personal. But our protagonist saw it as a great opportunity. Even though he had just lost his apartment that night, a new chapter of his life was about to start. And judging by the way things turned out, our boy had just hit the jackpot. He was now staying at Miss Cosplay's apartment. She told him he could stay there until he found a new place of his own. Since the place was usually empty, he could choose any room he wanted. Our protagonist didn't take long to make his choice, but Miss Cosplay quickly said that particular room was off limits. She became really flustered when he insisted, and when he finally stepped inside, he realized the room's decor was very childish. That's when he understood what was going on and teased her, saying that the room's cute style actually suited her personality perfectly. That left her incredibly embarrassed since she didn't want to be seen that way, especially as the heiress of a massive corporation. But to our protagonist, it wasn't a big deal at all. To him, it was just a normal girl's room. And despite being an heiress, Miss Cosplay was still just a woman at the end of the day. In fact, she was even cuter when she acted like this instead of trying to keep up her usual cold and distant personality around everyone else. That compliment left Cosplay Girl incredibly flustered. The closer she gets to our protagonist, the more she doesn't know how to act around him. Trying to hide her feelings, she claims she's only doing all this because she cares about his safety. And then her stomach growled, because she's hungry, obviously. Knowing that, our protagonist instantly made several types of food appear in his hands. These are emergency supplies he keeps stored in his internal inventory. Cosplay Girl was very impressed and wanted to know how he did that, since she had been curious about this ability ever since he used it back in the auction house. To avoid giving a long explanation, our protagonist simply said that he knows a bit of magic. Cosplay Girl then asked him to teach her too. In the middle of their conversation, our protagonist suddenly felt a sinister presence. He told the girl to go home immediately, but she wanted to know what was wrong. Outside, they were being watched by the company president, commonly known as Cosplay Girl's grumpy old dad, and our protagonist realized that if she didn't leave soon, her father would get furious. Yelling angrily, she started scolding her dad for spying on everything she was doing. The apartment our protagonist is staying in is actually very safe and located in a place where the Lone Shark gang won't bother him. By now, he's collected a few fragments from his most recent battles, and the auction is about to begin. He's curious to know what the relationship is between these fragments and the appearance of portals. The shadowy entity decided to explain, telling him that the fragments he has gathered are just a small piece of what's required to create a portal, and that every portal appearing in this world is connected to these fragments. After successfully opening a portal inside that room, it was time to step through. Our protagonist was taken to a dimension that looked like a vast desert, and he was curious, wondering if he'd run into new bugs or terrifying beasts. The dark entity explained that these creatures are merely prisoners of these dimensions and that the entire place is actually a prison. Our protagonist wanted to know more about the meaning behind all this, but the shadow entity said it could only reveal more information once he passed all the trials. Standing before him was a massive tower, the Tower of Heaven, the masterpiece of this dark entity and the place where our protagonist would be tested. In his thoughts, he found the place ridiculous. The decoration was terrible and it didn't make sense to him at all. Since the entity can read his thoughts, it became deeply offended, but it had to endure this humiliation in order to strengthen its own soul. Once inside the tower, our protagonist asked what exactly he was supposed to do there. The entity told him there are 6 floors. For our protagonist, just clearing the first one would already feel like a huge accomplishment. He was told that the creature guarding the first floor is the Shadow Dragon, which sounds terrifying. But when he saw the creature's shadow, he didn't feel any kind of pressure coming from it. Looking closely, he saw the dragon standing right in front of him. It was so tiny and cute that it was hard to even think of it as a deadly enemy. Our protagonist couldn't believe he'd have to fight something that small, but the shadow entity warned him that he was very wrong. He tried to pet the dragon's head, but before he could touch it, he felt something strange. The creature's energy suddenly began to surge at an alarming rate, and that surge of power was so sudden and overwhelming that our protagonist was thrown back across the room. Only then did he realize that this dragon had more secrets than he ever imagined. This little creature was far more dangerous than it looked, and now it had grown to several times its original size. With this transformation, its speed and strength had skyrocketed. Our protagonist could barely believe this sudden increase in power. The shadow entity then stated, almost mockingly, that the dragon's physical constitution was superior to that of our boy. That comment really offended him, but there was no time to argue. He had to fight. Luckily, he managed to dodge the first attack and immediately prepared to launch his shadow daggers at the dragon's back. He threw them with precision, but the creature zipped down the corridor, its movements lightning fast. When the daggers struck, they simply bounced off its thick armor. Realizing that this wasn't going to be an easy fight, our protagonist wondered how this dragon could be so absurdly powerful. The shadow entity warned him that at his current power level, he wouldn't even scratch this creature. That pushed our protagonist to consider more drastic measures. The battle kept escalating, and it almost felt like the dragon had been injected with some kind of suspicious steroid. Its body looked bulkier, more muscular than before. No matter what he tried, none of his attacks were effective. On the other hand, the shadow entity noticed something important. Its dragon was hungry, very hungry, and it let our protagonist know he himself was basically a snack. That little detail only seemed to excite the dragon even more, making it charge at him with a clear intention of eating him alive. Our protagonist barely dodged the attack, his mind racing as he realized the fight's dynamic had shifted. When he glanced back, he saw the dragon practically drooling, which made the situation way creepier. As he ran from this now enormous creature, he even wondered if it had its shots up to date. The shadow entity explained that having been without energy for so long, the dragon was desperate to replenish its nutrients. With that knowledge, our protagonist realized this wasn't even a proper duel anymore. It was a survival test. He couldn't just fight recklessly. He needed to actually protect himself. So he came up with a plan. Instead of focusing on killing it, he started hurling chunks of food at the dragon. This was his secret technique. The creature's eyes lit up at the sight of those chunks of chicken, and using all its speed and agility, it began snatching them up. That was exactly what our protagonist wanted. While the dragon was distracted and happily munching away, he unleashed his shadow whips, binding the beast completely. Just like that, he cleared the first floor's trial. The shadow entity, however, seemed disappointed with the outcome. Its prized dragon turned out to be a total glutton. With the first challenge completed, our protagonist wanted to know what the purpose of all this was. The shadow entity explained that every portal fragment he had collected was linked to a prison that had been built long ago, and gathering all the crystals was the key to unlocking their true purpose. Hearing that there might be even better rewards waiting ahead, our protagonist grew excited about facing the next floors. The shadow entity, though, had clearly picked up on the fact that he used a clever trick rather than brute force to win. Almost eager now, it urged him to head to the second floor immediately, hinting that the guards there would be very different. Sensing something in its tone, our protagonist instantly realized the entity was plotting something. Now they're being transported to the second floor, and our boy braces himself for the worst. The entity told him to take a look first, so he wouldn't act rashly. Once they arrived, the entity said there was no real danger there. Trusting those words, our boy went ahead and opened the door in front of him, and as soon as he stepped inside the next hall, he was shocked. He found himself face to face with several terrifying creatures, each one alone a serious threat. What he didn't expect was that all of these monstrosities were the servants of the shadow entity. All of those monsters started heading toward him, hungry to taste his flesh. The giant winged serpent nearly struck a fatal blow, but he barely dodged and is now very worried. After stepping into that hall, the exit wasn't sealed, so at least he had a way out. The serpent shouted at the others to kill the intruder, and every single one of them charged at him with full force. Thanks to his shadow reinforcement, he managed to buy himself a little time. With every ounce of determination, he sprinted toward the exit, dodging all those creatures. And let's be honest, the illustrator here was really lazy. Every monster that showed up had already appeared earlier in the story, except for the winged serpent. Using his insane agility, our boy made a break for it, barely managing to escape and slam the door shut behind him. Breathing heavily, he accused the shadow entity of lying about those creatures being its servants. But the truth was, the entity never actually lied. The problem was simply that our boy is still too weak. The entity also needs entertainment now and then, and it admitted it loved watching him run away like a scared kid. While they were talking, the presence of a category, a life form, was detected nearby. Outside, it was Miss Cosplay's father, who came to meet our protagonist. Once they gathered in the room, the old man revealed that the Lone Shark gang has become a problem. Our boy admitted that he's been targeted by them and that everything he's doing right now is for his own defense, but he's decided it's time to strike first. The old man explained that the Lone Shark gang has been causing trouble in his territory, but he hasn't acted yet because he wants to know their real motive. He doesn't want to disrupt the fragile balance that exists between the major powers in the city that could wreck the economy. Even if he despises the work of the Lone Sharks, he can't make a move unless they do something truly severe. Otherwise, if he acts too soon, he could trigger a massive power struggle, and someone will inevitably lose. Our protagonist realized the old man doesn't want to involve his family directly in the conflict, which is exactly what he wants too. Still, the old man knows something has to be done and suggested that our boy, together with Miss Cosplay, form a new organization so that an open war could take place properly. He even promised to provide funding and manpower to make it happen in the right way, so other powerful families wouldn't be able to interfere. The old man guaranteed he would protect them. Our protagonist was impressed with how skilled he was at weaving strategies, but the old man made it very clear that if it weren't for his daughter's insistence, he wouldn't be doing any of this. And now he wants to know what kind of spell our protagonist has cast on his precious daughter. Our boy hates having to sit through the old man's overly dramatic monologues. Feeling like her father was about to start unloading even more of his feelings, Miss Cosplay kicked him out of the room. Now that he was outside, she wanted to know what our protagonist planned to do next. Since he's still unawakened, his intention is to accept new missions so he can keep getting stronger. Now that she knows what he wants to do, his cosplay promised that she would help him. What our protagonist really wants is to gather an even larger number of fragments so he can bring terror and destruction down on the Lone Shark gang. The people standing before him are hand-picked individuals chosen to be part of the organization they're going to create, and all of these men seem more than willing to serve their new boss. Since our protagonist took too long to pick a name, Miss Cosplay chose one for him, the Shadow Faction. Our protagonist actually really liked the name and began inspecting his new subordinates. They all seem to be Category C awakened, which is a clear sign that his new force is actually impressive. But then he wanted to know why they were all wearing masks. Miss Cosplay explained that it was to protect their identities from external threats, but we all know it's just because the artist is lazy. He even tried to put a line in Miss Cosplay's mouth saying they look cooler that way, but I strongly disagree. And look at that, even the protagonist agreed with me. He said the artist is lazy too. Anyway, back to the story. Miss Cosplay wanted to know what the next move was, and our protagonist said they're going to steal jobs, as in, they're going to take every commission the Lone Shark gang has in this city. Miss Cosplay thought that might be a bit too intense, but our protagonist clarified that they'd only be taking the really valuable jobs. He already has a plan for the rest. Meanwhile, somewhere else, someone is being punished for their own incompetence. It's one of the underlings of the Lone Shark boss. Apparently, the Shadow Faction has already become a serious competitor, and now this man needs to vent his frustration. His subordinate explained that the Shadow Faction is extremely efficient. They send at least 6 Category C awakened on every mission, which makes it nearly impossible to compete. The Lone Shark boss realized that this competition was unfair, since the new faction is pouring money into the business to grab a massive share of the market. The subordinate also reported that newly discovered excavation sites are being bought up too quickly, leaving them with nothing. But Black Panther doesn't care about excuses. He only wants results. And if his subordinates don't fix this, heads are going to roll. Back with Miss Cosplay, our boy had good news to share. It seems the Lone Shark gang is really hurting and can't keep up with them anymore. Our protagonist made a clever strategic move that forced them to start impulsively buying portals because they can't afford to lose all their profits. And there's an unwritten rule among all miners. Those who work directly in extraction always stash away valuable items to sell for extra cash. They take advantage of this by smuggling the items out in their gear. In the past, Black Panther's gang had mercenaries and spies to find potential targets to rob. Since everything happens in the shadows, no one reports it to the authorities. If the loan shark gang loses this method of exploiting the trade, they're in serious trouble. After hearing all of this, Miss Cosplay was still quite confused. She's too pure and doesn't really know how crime actually works. But our protagonist knows better. All of the dimensions he had visited recently were useless, so he opened a portal right in front of her. He had already marked all the interesting portals for future exploration, and now he can move between them whenever he wants. All he needs to do is keep an eye on the ones that were bought by the loan shark gangs. Finally, the girl realized that our protagonist's plan is brilliant. He made it very clear that he has no interest in sharing his ability with too many people, so she has to carefully choose trustworthy individuals who can be at his disposal. Feeling excited, Miss Cosplay said she wanted to go along with our boy because she loves this kind of justice. After all, she's a spoiled rich girl, and social justice is pretty much what drives girls from her social circle. Our protagonist, a former poor guy, gave her a mocking little smile. Still, he's going to take advantage of her determination so that together they can destroy their enemies. Unfortunately, this is where we reach the last published chapter of this story, at least up to the writing of the script. A small truck is driving inside the mine. Inside are corrupt workers, anxious to smuggle the items they collected, but their path is suddenly blocked by a rock appearing out of nowhere. The poor driver didn't even notice what was happening, and when he finally realized the road was blocked, he panicked. Clearly, he's never heard of defensive driving. Immediately, the entire path became sealed off, with chunks of rock threatening to crush the truck. The workers are panicking because they know their lives are worth more than the cargo. Because of this sudden intervention, the truck slammed into a wall. The men jumped out, worried about the valuable cargo they were hauling. Right then, a mercenary with a terrible haircut appeared, telling them the cargo was still intact. But soon, these poor background characters are going to meet their doom because this mercenary is about to attack. The helpless workers start running, knowing they can't do a thing against an awakened fighter of this level. But this violent man is eager to unleash cruelty on them. Our protagonist, who had been watching everything, decided he was going to toy with this guy a little. Using Shadow Step, he suddenly appeared behind him. The mercenary, now completely enraged, had no idea where this person came from and swore he'd make him pay for interrupting his fun. Our protagonist charged at the thief because he can't stand people who steal from others. The mercenary quickly realized his opponent was extremely fast and would have to defend himself or risk losing his teeth. But our protagonist is absurdly fast, basically the Usain Bolt of beatdowns. After grabbing the villain's face, he smashed it straight into a massive rock wall. Having shown his physical superiority, he asked who he was. Trying to intimidate him, the man claimed he was connected to powerful people. That's when our protagonist revealed he had already captured the mercenary's allies who were in Category D. Seeing this, the mercenary became completely enraged. Miss Cosplay, already running out of patience, asked if they were just going to kill all these men now. But our protagonist said that killing ends things too quickly. He prefers to have a little fun first. He had a much better idea. Channeling dark energy into his hand, he gripped the mercenary's skull tightly. Now it was time for a little interrogation. This guy was going to tell him everything he knew about the Black Panther. Otherwise, he was going to be in serious trouble. He was also ordered to tell his boss that the ones responsible for this attack were the Shadow faction. Meanwhile, over at the hospital, Black Panther found his subordinates completely beaten and broken. He couldn't believe that this rival faction had grown so powerful in such a short amount of time. His subordinate explained that the situation was even worse. Those who had been defeated were suffering from severe injuries, and it would take at least 6 months for them to fully recover. That meant a ridiculous amount of money would have to be spent. While they were still discussing this in the hospital, he informed Black Panther that 2 other teams had also been completely wiped out. Furious, Black Panther demanded to know who was responsible for all of this. That's when he found out it was our protagonist. That revelation only made him angrier. He couldn't believe our protagonist was moving between portals with that kind of speed. But against his expectations, his subordinate showed him a video that proved beyond doubt that it was our protagonist. In the recording, our boy could be seen brutally beating Black Panther's men to a pulp, and it was clear he had done it on purpose. He even noticed the hidden camera and used it to send a direct message to Black Panther, telling him to come deal with this personally. After all, the medical bills for all those injured subordinates must already be costing a fortune. Provoked to his breaking point, Black Panther crushed the tablet in his hands and made a promise. He was going to kill our protagonist. Or at least try to like that video that helps Mamoru make more juicy content for his viewers, activate the cheeky little bell, and I'm out. Our protagonist is walking through an area full of warehouses. Miss Cosplay is with him and she asks why they were brought to that place. When our boy explains that during his last investigations he found some Black Panther mobsters near those buildings, and he believes that very soon the Black Panther himself will be involved in the upcoming crimes, the girl immediately realizes that our protagonist wants to loot the place while the mobsters are away, and that is exactly what our genius plans to do. As he admires the area, he notices his phone ringing. He's being informed that the Black Panther has just left for the portal to dimension number 3, which is great because now he'll have plenty of time. As expected, the Black Panther will be gone for a long while, but since our guy is cautious, He's going to annoy that jerk just enough to give his friend the time she needs so she can loot everything. Hearing this plan, she gets scared because she knows the Black Panther is B rank, and our boy might need help, but he makes it clear that it won't be necessary. He doesn't intend to get into a direct fight, and even if things actually get dangerous, he can simply open a portal and leave. With that in mind, the girl wishes him good luck. In that other dimension, the Black Panther thinks today is his lucky day because the loot in that place is extremely valuable. One of his lackeys is impressed by the Black Panther's presence, saying that as soon as he showed up, our protagonist got terrified and didn't interfere with anything. To that mobster, miners are just trash, and even with help from C-rank people, they wouldn't be able to do a thing. But after saying that, he suddenly senses a malicious presence. The Black Panther instantly looks back, wanting to know who arrived. One of his subordinates is already being choked, and our boy is impressed by the senses of someone who's at B rank. While several background characters line up behind the Black Panther to get beaten, our protagonist wants to know why they're so tense, since he's just a miner. The poor guy being choked begs to be saved, and our boy says no one should move. Otherwise, this extra might end up in serious trouble. Showing how deeply tied to the mafia he is, the Black Panther not only ignores that warning but also attacks his own subordinate. After getting hit by the flames, the poor guy turns into a human keyboard, which greatly entertains our protagonist. Soon they notice that our protagonist has vanished. He used his shadow movement to appear behind all of them, impressed by the mobster's lack of mercy. That only makes the man even more furious, and now he's throwing fireballs at our boy. But he quickly realizes that this strategy is foolish, because he's only hitting his own subordinates, who are now not only going bald but also ending up with third-degree burns. Our protagonist says that being a servant of that mobster is truly dangerous, but the Black Panther has already accepted losing a few men just to defeat our protagonist. Concentrating his power more and more, he wants to see whether our boy can dodge his flame tornado. And just like the name suggests, a giant tornado of fire appears, sending all the extras into complete despair. The idiots are running away with their bodies glowing red, and only our Jaidachap protagonist remains standing. But the moment he manages to use his shadow movement, he escapes as well. This only makes the Black Panther even angrier, because in his mind, our boy only manages to escape by hiding. But the truth is he doesn't want to underestimate his enemy, which is why planning is absolutely necessary. And now he wants to see what kind of expression that jerk will have when he returns to Earth. Inside the warehouse, shouting is breaking out. Some idiots are saying they were victims of a robbery carried out by our protagonist's team, and there was nothing those lackeys could do. Knowing how much he lost, the Black Panther is completely furious. He decides to burn his own subordinates. Now he realizes that Miss Cosplay has many allies. Driven by a hatred that only capitalism can create, he promises that his revenge will be extremely cruel. The Black Panther tries to argue with his boss since he lost billions in this little stunt, but he gets no support. It could start a war between two very influential families. At the moment, Miss Cosplay is completely out of their reach. Not to mention that they are at a critical stage of the experiment they're working on. So the Black Panther needs to keep his own impulses in check. But he says he can't stand this situation and is willing to kill our protagonist and his little girlfriend, and after that he'll leave the city himself. But then he realizes he was being far too insolent toward his boss. That mustached old man has made pacts with every type of evil entity, and he's ready to shut the Black Panther up right there, making him push daisies from the wrong side of the dirt. The Black Panther has to kneel because he ended up ripping part of his underwear. The old man tells him not to worry about such a small amount of money because once their experiment succeeds, he promises he'll help him get revenge. As the boss walks away, the Black Panther thinks he's never been humiliated like this in his entire life. Now he's determined to take care of this task personally. Our protagonist needs to pay for what he's done. Inside her family's car, Miss Cosplay tells one of the extras that our protagonist is truly very smart. Since the poor guy isn't paid to listen to this kind of thing, he asks the driver to hurry because the young lady beside him is clearly missing her boyfriend. She becomes embarrassed immediately, since she never said she missed him. But that bodyguard has had enough. He heard our protagonist's name 24 times that day. While they're talking, the extra notices that a truck is heading straight toward them. The poor guy tries to react quickly to prevent anything worse from happening to the one who pays his salary. Using all the supreme skills, he manages to get both of them out of the car through the window, avoiding the worst part of the collision. Because of the force of the impact, the flammable material inside the truck is now leaking. It doesn't take long before a fire breaks out. They watch in shock at the destruction caused by that truck. That's when Miss Cosplay senses the presence of someone absolutely despicable. The Black Panther has arrived with his lackeys. Her bodyguard immediately orders everyone to protect the young lady. Filled with the confidence of someone who grew up in a protective social bubble, Cosplay says the Black Panther is ignoring reality. With so few lackeys, he won't be able to do anything. The moment she says that, she starts feeling something strange. Now she has a pounding headache, and her bodyguard realizes something is very wrong with this water. The Black Panther's malicious stare makes it obvious that he planned everything happening right now. What's falling from the sky isn't ordinary liquid. It's spider venom, strong enough to knock out even someone from A-class within hours. The bodyguard tells the young lady to run, and the Black Panther is already ready to attack. Grabbing the poor extra by the neck, he sees how loyal this man is. and now he's going to turn him into a flaming popsicle. The spoiled girl watches everything completely powerless. Meanwhile, our protagonist is living peacefully, sharpening his techniques during a training session. He's preparing to master the shadow step, passing through all those obstacles like lightning and leaving only several slashes behind. Our boy manages to slice those wooden objects entirely. The entity living in his heart is thrilled, noticing that our protagonist has become stronger, but our boy already knows he's at least C rank. That's when he realizes his friend is calling him, and the shadow entity makes it clear that our boy may be C rank, but he's much stronger than the average. After looking at his phone, our protagonist throws his knife to the ground because he realizes his dear friend is with someone absolutely despicable. Unfortunately, the spoiled girl has just been captured. Filled with rage toward the Black Panther, our protagonist asks if he's really sure about what he's doing because the fool clearly doesn't understand the consequences. Trying to intimidate him, the mobster says he can do whatever he wants with that girl, and now he's giving him two options. The first is to pay a small sum of 10 billion, and the second is to watch live everything he plans to do to that spoiled girl. Our protagonist agrees to hand over the money. He wants to know where he should deliver it. The Black Panther tells him to meet at the warehouse that was robbed, but our protagonist must come alone. Knowing how strong he currently is, the shadow entity strongly recommends that he not die, because that would be quite problematic. But our protagonist won't abandon his companions. That goes against his principles. And besides, he doesn't know who's actually going to die today. Following the mobster's rules, our protagonist goes to meet him. The Black Panther wants to know where the money is, but our protagonist wants to see Zali first. Willing to cooperate, the Black Panther orders them to bring the spoiled girl. That immediately worries our protagonist because a crane starts moving. The poor girl is hanging helplessly, unable to speak because she's been gagged. Seeing she's at least still alive, our protagonist opens his storage space, revealing a large amount of money requested by the mobster. His lackeys check to make sure it's real and are delighted to confirm that it is. Now that the exchange is done, the mobster needs to release the girl. But now that he's received his payment, being the extra he is, he no longer intends to cooperate. Our protagonist cannot be allowed to leave alive. Knowing he would be betrayed in this deal, our protagonist reveals a surprise. He activates a device and the entire pile of money begins to glow, exploding right in front of those idiots. A cloud of smoke rises and the Black Panther has no idea where our protagonist might be. But he quickly finds out since he's almost struck by his blade. After dodging the attack, the Black Panther tries to use his flames to fight. But our protagonist is shocked by how foolish he is. The guy just produced fire in heavily polluted air, causing yet another uncontrolled explosion. This time the flames are much bigger, almost reaching the spoiled girl's body. She watches everything carefully, worried about her boy. Before she can understand what happened, someone manages to cut the rope tying her. She thinks she's about to crash to the ground, but when she opens her eyes, she realizes she's safe. She's in our protagonist's arms and he's riding a dragon. The two of them are about to leave through a dimensional portal, which leaves the Black Panther absolutely furious. He believes that once he manages to capture our boy, everything will be his, but half his lackeys were injured in the process. Even so, he calls the remaining half to follow him into that unknown portal. After passing through the gate, the crowd of fools tries to chase our protagonist. They were tricked into entering a massive castle and the spoiled girl is worried about it. But our protagonist plans to use the presence of all those extras to solve a problem for him. He then asks the girl to hide beside the dragon because our boy wants to have some fun. As soon as he jumps from the creature, he assures her nothing bad will happen to her. The shadow entity immediately realizes he's trying to use those people to reach the second floor, and that's exactly what he intends. The entity is shocked that our boy manages to exploit the rules like this, and our protagonist is focused on the reward he'll get, an armor capable of resisting A-rank attacks. Now that he's waiting for the fools to arrive, he has to defend himself from a fire attack. He quickly notices his enemies are being very cautious. The Black Panther believes he has our protagonist completely cornered. But for our boy, there's no reason to run or escape. He already rescued the spoiled girl. Everything left now is for fun. Ready to use his shadow powers once again, he's eager to discover the limits of his own strength. To the Black Panther, this poor kid must have lost his mind. He immediately hypes up his extras, saying our boy is completely alone. Once they finish him off, they'll get to enjoy the woman he saved. Our protagonist knows he doesn't have the advantage in numbers, but there are many ways he can overcome them. It's time for them to meet the creatures inside this place. Behind him, a massive door opens, revealing hungry and dangerous eyes. It's time to make these idiots help him clear that floor. After seeing those creatures, the Black Panther and his men are terrified. They now need to be extremely careful, otherwise their deaths will be agonizing. The Black Panther keeps his focus, summoning flames to fight the first monster. He tries to push the creature back with all his strength. It looks like his flames actually made some difference. The one enjoying this whole fight is our young protagonist, noticing that his enemies are doing everything they can to survive. Now he manipulates his shadows to create a weapon, forming a massive war hammer in his hands, ready to draw the creature's attention toward his enemy. He strikes the fireball with all the strength he has. At the moment of impact, he realizes how impressive that force is. He has to be careful. Meanwhile, the other fools also need to keep fighting for their lives. After delivering that powerful strike, our boy needs to catch his breath for a moment. The Black Panther notices our kid won't be able to block many more of his attacks, which he finds very interesting. But our protagonist only wanted to block the first one, hinting that his enemy should look around. That's when the Black Panther finally understands he's completely surrounded by threatening creatures. This only makes him even more furious. And with the monsters fully entertained, our protagonist is free to continue his journey. That's when the villain realizes he has been completely fooled by our boy. His rage grows even stronger, and now he's burning with flames, ready to destroy everything. He launches a massive attack at the monster standing before him, but quickly notices he'll have to repeat that many more times. He swears he'll take down our protagonist no matter what. At last, our boy manages to move deeper into the castle and wants to know if the shadow entity is lying, because an armor capable of resisting A-rank attacks sounds too good to be true. The entity says it has no reason to lie, and it seems something suddenly appears in his path. Standing before them is the butler of that floor, who seems to have been defeated by time itself. The entity would like our protagonist to give him a proper funeral once everything is over, expressing how grateful it is after the boy agrees. While observing that figure, the entity stays silent for a few seconds. Then it asks him to continue forward because the armor is just ahead. Again, our protagonist spots something. The armor they've been seeking is floating in the air, the shadow armor the entity spoke of. He's stunned by its appearance, while the entity can't help thinking that if our boy's shadow reinforcement were already at level 3, everything would be different. Even so, it's eager to see what our protagonist will be able to do with this equipment. Only then does our boy realize the entity is way too quiet. It tells him to hurry and claim his reward, but he wants to know why the entity is getting more emotional by the second. Even so, he moves toward the armor. But before he can touch it, the armor grabs him by the neck. It says it has been a long time and thought its master would never return. Now, our protagonist is terrified because he has no idea what's going on. The butler of that place has manifested inside the armor, and he knows his master is extremely powerful, and now he's forced to parasitize a ridiculous human. Worried about what may happen to its vassal, the shadow entity orders the armor to stop immediately, making it clear that this is a command. For a moment, the armor questions whether this is truly happening. It recognizes that its master no longer has the right to issue such an order. Its soul wandered inside that armor only to extend its life. What returned is just a fragment of its former master's soul, and now it decides it will refine it, reaching level 3 of shadow strengthening and turning that armor into a vessel for its own soul. With his neck being squeezed tighter and tighter, our boy starts to panic. Now that they're communicating through the mind, our protagonist asks whether he would be able to win if he surrendered control of his body to the entity. The entity is stunned. It notices our boy isn't afraid of completely losing control. He says the situation is far too dire for jokes, and if the entity could really take over that easily, it wouldn't have returned his body the last time. And it seems that's true. Now the two of them are functioning as if they were one. Our protagonist's eyes shine violently. It's time to show this armor who's in charge. But the artifact knows that in the current state, the power of its former master is only at A rank, not enough to be intimidating. Still, he says it's more than enough to beat up this unruly vassal, and the armor is stunned to realize he actually controls the domain of shadows. Next, they also use the domain of shadows against the armor, but the armor believes it's just a bluff, since it was never taught to fully use that technique. That's when the entity admits it sometimes needs to hold itself back. Even so, the armor thinks it can win and charges forward, convinced that the body it's using now is more than enough to secure a victory. Our protagonist waits patiently for the sword to approach, dodging at the last second and managing to get behind his opponent. This terrifies the armor because it has no idea what technique he just used. Without wasting time, our protagonist starts attacking as well. That's when the armor realizes they won't be able to maintain this transformation for long. Our boy's body is under enormous pressure, but he assures the entity he can keep going for a few more minutes. The armor also realizes those attacks aren't enough to break through its defense. Because of that, the entity decides to use brute force in its purest form, striking the enemy with its own hands. This overwhelming power finally makes the armor hesitant. The blow completely shatters the sword it was using, forcing it to block with its arms. After that, the entity notices it only needs to push a little harder to force the soul of its former subordinate out. But using that much power is already exhausting our protagonist. He insists he can endure just a bit longer, but the entity knows that if he goes beyond his limits, the boy's soul will be burned and consumed. Because of that brief hesitation, the soul bound to the armor manages to return to it. Regaining its power, the armor mocks its former master, saying he has become pathetic. These insults infuriate the entity even more, and now it has to defend against a brutal attack. The former vassal is ready to end the battle right now. As the fight grows more intense, the entity takes full control and even manifests its mask. It materializes before its former servant, who now believes he has the advantage. He uses his energy to trap our boy. The entity has to admit it never imagined having trouble with an old subordinate. Growing more confident, the former lackey believes he will fully return to life this time. My God, only now has it become clear. The dark entity and our protagonist have separated. It must be some kind of insane strategy because now our boy is completely alone. Given the situation, the dark entity gives him sincere advice. It tells him to run. But our protagonist decides to completely ignore the danger and charges at the armor. It doesn't feel even slightly threatened by him. While one worries about having his soul consumed to that armor, our protagonist is nothing more than an ant attempting the impossible. And because of that, he is brutally beaten. Our boy is coughing up a lot of blood. The dark entity reminds him he's only C rank, and it's time to escape before things get worse. Now our protagonist has a very intimate moment and decides to open his heart. He says he was treated like a slave from the beginning, forced by the entity to fight in other dimensions and level up, forced to obey all of that entity's commands. Now that they are separated, whether he flees or not is his choice alone. And with courage burning inside him, our boy charges in again. While striking his enemy, he realizes that before he relied on shadow energy to fight, but now he himself can contribute to taking down this traitor. The armor is simply waiting to see how far our boy's body can last, since to it he's nothing but a fool. Pushing past his limits, our protagonist says it's up to him to decide what happens. And this time he charges forward with absolute determination. Only then does he notice his body is falling apart. Even worse, it's as if he's turning into shadows themselves, being consumed by them. Watching closely, the traitorous subordinate is sure our protagonist is a complete idiot, saying that for an old master he chose someone exceptionally stupid. Even his shadow entity is fading now, begging our boy not to push himself any further. Apparently, both of them are absorbed by the cursed armor, which now smiles like a villain, ready to return to life at last. All that remains of its former enemies is nothing more than a stain on the floor. However, that stain begins to grow, spreading across the entire place. That's when the villain realizes he messed with something extremely dangerous, something called the author's will to make the protagonist win. He knows that technique very well. It's the eternal night, born from the domain of shadows. That should be completely impossible, because the energy wasn't fully refined, and the poor soul doesn't even notice our protagonist appearing behind him. He's caught completely off guard when he hears our boy's warning. He already told him this would happen, and now he's going to be erased one way or another. The armor is pitiful now, terrified of the apparition standing before it. After it tries to slice our protagonist, it realizes its attacks are useless. Our protagonist has awakened some interesting abilities. Within the domain of shadows, he can alter his physical form, enhance all his shadow attributes, and the targets he defeats turn into energy. That's when the armor realizes our protagonist is already at the 3rd level. And now the AliExpress version of solo leveling finally understands where shadow energy comes from, absorbing souls. That's why the armor is absolutely horrified by his current power. And our protagonist wants to know what this poor soul plans to do after being kicked out of the armor. He blasts it with a devastating attack. Terrified, the traitor does everything he can to dodge. But our protagonist is already behind him, ready to evict the parasite from his new armor, and he better do it right now. After striking the armor with everything he has, the intruder is thrown to the ground. Even so, his strength still isn't enough to defeat him, since that armor endures A-rank blows. If our protagonist can't break the shell, he'll try something else. The intruder thinks our boy is just being reckless, but every time he tries to land a blow, his strikes hit nothing but air. Now, our protagonist begins turning into shadows and slowly enters the interior of the armor, leaving his enemy completely shocked. He tries to purge the presence of this invader, but little by little, the soul possessing the armor is forced out, thrown out entirely. At that moment, the intruder realizes he no longer has the artifact's protection. Finally, our protagonist understands why he hid inside it. The armor absorbs shadow energy to compensate for the damage the soul takes. And now that he's defenseless, the intruder will only grow weaker. Believing he still has some strategic advantage, he tries to retreat, but our protagonist isn't letting that happen. With his chains, he restrains his opponent completely. Since that dimension is tied to his soul, our protagonist could get hurt if he attacks him. But that threat has no effect at all. Our boy knows souls are raw material for shadow energy. And now that the traitor has completely lost the armor's protection, he's being consumed. The one doing this is the shadow entity. At last, this enemy becomes nourishment for our boy's growth. In his final moments, the shadow entity says its former servant underestimated our protagonist's hunger for power. Knowing his end is near, the former servant says the next one to be absorbed by this greedy kid will be the shadow entity itself, since no living being can withstand the test of desire. Now that our protagonist's power has increased, it seems he's being tested. He starts screaming like a Dragon Ball character. That's when the shadow entity notices something. Our protagonist has finally reached B rank, and he's far stronger than before. He immediately uses his power to interfere with the sky above them. His energy rises toward the shadow entity, and our protagonist declares that now it's his turn. The shadow entity becomes terrified, while our protagonist smiles with total confidence. He manages to fully restrain his old mentor. By manipulating the armor, he also understands how that soul managed to stay alive. Our protagonist puts the armor on the shadow entity so that it becomes his new body. This result shocks the entity. It never expected something so considerate from our boy. He says his mentor has a very dark personality and complains that if he absorbed him, it would give him stomach problems for sure. And besides, that armor is huge and ugly. He refuses to wear it no matter what. Let's be honest. Anyone who read that masterpiece Solo Leveling can't avoid seeing the reference now that the shadow entity is suited up in armor. Back in the previous hall of the castle, the Black Panther's subordinates are having a rough time. But he doesn't care about their lives. All he wants is revenge. He even burns one of his own lackeys just to defeat the creature in front of him. Surrounded by weaklings, he refuses to waste time saving that kind of trash. That's when the Black Panther notices someone approaching. It's our protagonist accompanied by the shadow entity, and he's surprised the Black Panther survived this long. The moment he sees our protagonist, the fool becomes furious. Without thinking twice, he charges in. But the shadow entity is far stronger than before. With nothing but a movement of his eyes, he repels that useless man's body. That's when the Black Panther realizes he's standing before an A-rank being. Fighting our protagonist alone was already bad enough. Now that he has help, the situation is hopeless. Our protagonist asks the entity if joining the fight would make things too humiliating, not to mention the Black Panther would make an excellent sparring session. The criminal can't believe what he just heard and becomes even angrier. He thinks he only needs one good chance to beat our protagonist. But without hesitation, our boy is already using the domain of shadows. Unfortunately for this poor soul, he doesn't realize our boy isn't D-rank anymore. He's heading straight toward his own destruction. Our protagonist storms toward him filled with fury, then punches the idiot right in the stomach with full force. And if he felt like using the bathroom before, it definitely just happened now. Still trying to recover from the damage, the criminal sees that our protagonist hasn't stopped attacking. Feeling insulted, he decides to use his flames as well, but that doesn't scare our boy at all. Both of them unleash their energy to the fullest, but all the Black Panther manages to earn is another beating. That's when he notices our protagonist has already reached B rank, and it happened far too quickly. Our boy explains he got a little help from a few idiots who decided to make his life harder. Realizing our protagonist has become much stronger, the Black Panther grows even more enraged. He charges forward for another attack, claiming that nothing will change the outcome of this battle because he believes his strength is far superior to our boy's. He launches several strikes, but none of them manage to hit our protagonist. Watching the fight closely, the shadow entity tells our boy that within the domain of shadows, he doesn't need to use his own energy. He can actually command and use the energy around him, turning the enemy's own power against him. That is the true essence of darkness. Our boy says he understands the message, but what he's really not used to is the entity acting like an excellent teacher. That's genuinely surprising. The Black Panther overhears this and says our boy isn't a genius who can learn things in real time, but our protagonist is already giving orders to the energy around him, making it obey his commands. Before he can be hit by the Black Panther's flames, he forms a large protective barrier of shadow energy. This leaves his opponent completely speechless. Feeling the true power flowing through him, our protagonist has to admit the sensation is addictive. He then sends a massive blast of energy toward his enemy. The Black Panther dodges, but he's certain that if he hadn't, that would have been the last moment of his life. He rushes forward desperately, trying to close the distance, convinced that because he reacted faster than the blast, he now has a chance to counterattack. But our protagonist was already expecting a reckless approach like that and is prepared to deliver some pain. The previous attack was just bait to lure him straight into suffering. Once again, our protagonist sends the Black Panther flying. While the fool struggles to get up, he tries to understand how this is happening. The kid uses ability after ability, his energy doesn't drain. On the contrary, he's clearly getting stronger. Now our protagonist walks calmly toward his prey, saying that if this is all he has, he's disappointed. It's time to end this match. Completely furious and with nothing left to lose, the Black Panther vows that even if he dies, he'll take our boy with him. But our protagonist is fully protected by the plot armor. As they exchange blows, there's no sign of exhaustion from our boy. He finally lands several precise strikes with his shadow blade, phasing straight through his opponent's body and taking a few limbs with him. To be more specific, both of the Black Panther's arms. It takes a moment for the villain's nervous system to understand what just happened, and maybe he'll never be able to wipe his own butt again. The Black Panther collapses to his knees, trying to understand what his life will be from now on. Then he feels a dark, malicious energy approaching the back of his neck. He can't even lift his hands to say he's surrendered, and now he says that if our boy has enough courage, he'll do what needs to be done. But our protagonist believes death is far too soft a punishment for people like him. At this moment, this paperweight is more valuable alive than dead. The shadow entity grows curious about that decision and wants to know why this man's life should be spared. Our boy says he wants more information about the mustached old man, but the Black Panther insists that not even death would make him reveal anything he knows. Still, our protagonist is certain that the spoiled girl's family has ways of making him confess something. Hearing that threat, the Black Panther begs to be released, otherwise he'll be hunted down by the mustache man's corporate group. But our boy, already out of patience, tells him to shut up using his shadows. He says being hunted is not a problem. In fact, he's going to hunt all of them. The shadow entity guarantees it can handle any A-rank hunter, considering that it's way of repaying our boy. But until they know exactly who was involved in what happened to his parents, they need to be very cautious. And when it comes to revenge, our boy knows it's much better to handle it personally. Back in the real world, inside a military base, several people gather waiting for the general to arrive. Inside an office, some men watch the troops moving and one asks if the mayor knows anything. The bald mayor says he knows nothing. Apparently he's ignored by folks with healthy hairlines. With them is a very well-connected old man, the spoiled girl's father. He's being informed about his daughter's rescue and everything the Black Panther did. He immediately becomes furious, telling the mayor that he has no idea what's motivating the military. He then moves toward another executive in the room, telling him he needs to learn how to control this dog, or he'll make sure he learns how to behave properly. The executive plays dumb, claiming he doesn't know what the old man is talking about. The father says he hopes that's true because otherwise he'll be added to his list of people who will suffer as well. Now the two of them are locked in an ego contest to see who's stronger, and judging by the mayor's grin, he's rooting for violence. Another man enters the room and seeing how excited they are feels relieved. He tells them to use that strength in the right place because a major disaster is approaching. This is the military commander, and he gathered all these men for something far more serious. Since he isn't a scholar, he asks the boy with glasses beside him to explain. The scientist explains that the A-rank fighters achieved that power during the battle 10 years ago, and everyone knows how powerful monsters of that rank and above are. They don't know why the second opening appeared and vanished so quickly. But over the last 10 years, they've been monitoring all radiation fluctuations related to the event. 5 years ago, the same pattern reappeared and has been increasing in frequency over time. In the last 3 months, it matches perfectly with the event from 10 years ago. Hearing this, all the men are shocked and terrified. That's when the bald mayor asks the general a question. He wants to know if they're going to face the same event again. And that's exactly what the general confirms. There will be a second dimensional opening. Countless shadow creatures are eager to enter Earth and have a little fun. All of them now have to worry about this possible opening because once it happens, chaos will take over everything. The spoiled girl's father makes it very clear that he doesn't care about any of that as long as certain people stop acting behind his back. But the general stresses that the situation is extraordinary, and if any of those men decide to cause trouble, he'll personally take exceptional measures to deal with them. He also says the spoiled girl's father must go with him now because he'll be given a full explanation about the current situation. After getting into the car, they finally leave, leaving the bald man and his friend behind. The bald man notices the general isn't even pretending anymore with the way he's treating him. It's as if the spoiled girl's father practically belongs to the military. And he's certain the hostility aimed at his friend was caused by the Black Panther incident, so he suggests the man stay quiet for a while. But even in front of the bald man, this suited executive keeps acting like he knows nothing. Either way, the bald man recommends his friend take a look at the latest news. Far away, in a corporate building, someone is informing the mustached old man about the situation. On the other end of the phone, someone is furious with him. Until now, they had ignored his ties to the Black Panther, but a major crime has just taken place in the city, since that man tried to kidnap the daughter of that influential old man with hair. The story is the only thing showing on every news channel, and the suited man hopes the mustached old man isn't involved. Completely irritated, he says it was just a small problem, and that he would never act without contacting his associate. But the other person is still furious about the outcome, ordering the mustached man to earn that family's forgiveness and cut all ties with the Black Panther's gang, or else his associate won't protect him anymore. After ending the call, the mustached old man becomes furious with the consequences of that reckless stunt. The spoiled girl is now in the hospital, hoping her bodyguard recovers from his wounds. According to the doctor who treated him, everything will be fine. While they're there, an unexpected visitor appears, the mustached old man. Acting all fake and polite, he says he's relieved that everyone is safe. He never imagined the Black Panther would do something like that. Our protagonist wasn't expecting to see him there, and it's doubtful that this old man didn't know exactly what the Black Panther planned to do. Trying to justify himself, the mustached man says that criminal was only a business partner, and now he'll cut ties with all criminals and even help hunt down the remaining ones. Our protagonist wants to know what those words really mean. It sounds like he sacrificed a pawn to save the king. Offended, the mustached old man says our boy should know his own limits, because what he stole from the Black Panther is enough to live luxuriously for the rest of his life. But our boy gets straight to the point. Those material goods are only the beginning. What he truly wants is that old man's head. The mustached man immediately looks at the spoiled girl, wanting to know if that's her family's stance as well. But after almost dying and being kidnapped, she suggests that he draw his own conclusions. It doesn't take long for him to realize there's nothing left to discuss. He tells our protagonist that he belongs to a very powerful corporation, and without evidence, he'll never be touched by insects. Our boy tells him he better pray the Black Panther never shows up again, otherwise it'll become his worst nightmare. In a mysterious place, members of this gang are undergoing experiments, being injected with something called the blood of God. The poor guys are extremely worried because they have no idea what kind of drug that is, but the doctors administer it anyway. The first test subject seems to be going through a very dangerous transformation. His body suddenly becomes incredibly strong, snapping every restraint holding him down. Now these people are completely out of control. Speaking on the phone, the mustached old man wants to know what the news will report the next day. They might say it was an act of big revenge, or that the gang members lost control after using a forbidden drug. Either way, he thinks it will be very interesting. Riding with the general, the old man with hair wants to know why the general is so eager to meet our protagonist. The truth is that over the past month, our boy has made enormous progress and even sold valuable items, so the general is extremely curious about him. While looking out the car window, the general sees someone moving. Apparently, he's not the only one in a hurry to meet our protagonist. The old man explains that regarding the weapons he purchased from him, they didn't seem special based on their materials, but the general disagrees, saying their combat performance is exceptional. That seems to catch the old man's interest. The general mocks him, saying age must have damaged the sharp instincts he had when he was younger. Suddenly, all the cars have to stop because a completely insane person steps right in front of them. It's our protagonist, greeting the general personally, surprised to receive such important visitors. But the general is very friendly toward our boy and enjoys being recognized instantly. The two start exchanging compliments only Koreans know how to give, and the general asks if he's not going to be invited in for a cup of tea. Our protagonist says that would actually be great, but the timing is a bit inconvenient. The general steps closer with a dark expression and says his men will handle these people outside, but our protagonist doesn't understand what he means. He finally decides to invite his guests inside. Gathered in the room, a soldier extra says the transmission is now fully connected, but our protagonist warns them he doesn't sense anyone powerful outside. There's no way mere soldiers could do anything. The general agrees with him, but he's truly surprised by how calm our boy is, while the boy assumes the general is about to waste his men's lives. Even so, the defensive operation is initiated. The attack squad is outside already armed with their flame-spitting toys. The general watches everything being transmitted. Our protagonist is shocked. The lackeys he just beat up have already recovered their bones, and they all look extremely strange. The shadow entity watches closely and seems to recognize what has happened, and that terrifies him because that thing shouldn't exist in this world. The soldiers start firing at the enemies. Some extras are already sent to the wonderful world of ideas, but several remain alive. One of these creatures is about to wipe out the soldiers, sending a huge attack toward them. One of the poor soldiers calls for drone support. High-tech drones appear on the battlefield, machines capable of producing extremely effective barriers, completely covering the area where the soldiers are positioned. Even so, that gangster's power turns out to be shockingly strong, causing massive destruction. The soldiers now have to resume their attack before they fall victim to another strike like that. They put their flame-spitting toys to work, turning that cursed extra into Swiss cheese. Showing how coordinated they are, they maintain formation and push forward toward the target. Our protagonist is amazed by that firepower, wondering if they were enhanced using the equipment he provided. Even the old man with hair wants to confirm if that's the case, and the general confirms it. If they get enough raw materials, things will improve even more. Our boy is impressed by the soldier's strength, but there's something these men are overlooking. Before he can say what it is, someone breaks his window. Our protagonist realizes there's an extra who's very eager to have his life ended in a painful way. Looking at the destruction around the window, the general says that whoever did that didn't get past his men. That one was left specifically for him to deal with using his abilities. Our boy immediately understands they want to see what he can do in actual combat. Standing before him is yet another lackey completely out of control, wanting nothing but revenge. His expression is dark and hollow. It looks like he took enough fentanyl to tranquilize an elephant. Now he's entirely deranged, controlling huge boulders to try to end our protagonist's life. He hurls a sharp stone chunk capable of crushing any person. Our boy just laments the damage it's going to cause to the property since it doesn't even belong to him. His shadow blade touches the boulder, completely disintegrating it while he rushes toward the enemy. The general is shocked by this show of force. He thinks our boy must be at least B rank, maybe even higher. The old man with hair thinks he's exaggerating, but the general tells him to watch closely because it doesn't even look like our protagonist is using his full potential. The drug-filled extra tries to harden his arms with stone to block the attack, and even then he absorbs a good amount of the damage from our protagonist. Now our boy wants to know how these extras leveled up so quickly. He has no idea what drug they took, but he wouldn't mind having 2 grams of it for personal research. But the lackey doesn't answer. His mind is fully rotted from the drugs, leaving him unable to say anything coherent. Our boy realizes this substance must be extremely strong, so it's best it stays illegal. Now the out-of-control extra unleashes his intense power again, shouting that he's not a normal human anymore. Moments later, his entire body turns into stone. To our protagonist, that's great. It's easier to be cruel to something that's no longer human. But what he really wants in this fight is to avoid showing his full power in front of those 2 curious old men. Using only the first stage of shadow reinforcement, he believes it's enough for the situation. And it really is. The stone monster is completely obliterated. The general says the early reports about our protagonist were exaggerated, but after witnessing it firsthand, he now thinks those reports were way too modest. Our protagonist is certain that getting a late-night visit from the general isn't because the man wants to help him. And he's absolutely right. The general explains that the equipment his soldiers used was created from the sword our boy recovered, and he wants more raw material. What they already obtained has been used in combat, and our protagonist believes the military might be able to produce that element themselves. But the general says their biggest problem right now is time. He can't give too many details to someone like our protagonist, but a level 2-dimensional portal could appear in the city at any moment, and even with all the power the army currently has, they might not be prepared for what's coming. This news is truly alarming, and everyone who hears it becomes worried immediately. But the general places a hand on the boy's shoulder. He says they need to prevent collateral damage, and that's why he needs more material to equip the army. Our protagonist promises he'll find a way to obtain it, asking for 3 days before giving an answer, but he can't guarantee he'll get much. To motivate him further, the general says his effort will be rewarded, but he also makes it clear he can't give him money right now. What he can offer is a position within the military chain of command, even arranging an engagement between him and the spoiled girl, which is just as interesting, but our boy thinks that's a bit inappropriate. The old man with hair doesn't like that conversation at all. He's extremely possessive of his daughter. The general then wants to know if our protagonist has no interest in the spoiled girl whatsoever, and our boy says he can handle that situation personally. Inside the shadow dimension, the entity is thinking about the appearance of this portal. Those people who try to kill our protagonist must have received divine blood, and he never imagined they'd find a way to open a portal like that so quickly. Our protagonist senses the entity is furious about the topic, so he starts asking questions. The entity explains that a level 2 portal is not something our protagonist can handle yet. If he wants to stay alive, he needs to stay away from it immediately. But our boy wants to know what lies inside such a gate that made his personal demons so irritated. The entity says there are many A-rank monsters and even some S-rank ones. That is the true danger. After that intense conversation, they return to the military base in the city. Curious about what happened, the general wants the bodies of those idiots to be studied and makes the request directly to the old man with hair. He already knows about the tragedy involving our protagonist's parents, and since the mustache man's company is involved, they should compensate the boy somehow. The general is furious with everything he has learned. He also knows that those morons were using some kind of drug. At least they managed to capture the Black Panther. The poor guy had to be shackled by the legs because he doesn't have arms anymore. The general knows that if the mustache man is involved, the old man with hair might face problems too, so he suggests leaving everything to the military. Besides, he wants to do all of this so that our protagonist might owe him a favor in the future. Inside the shadow dimension, our boy is instructed to go through the 3rd trial so his strength can increase. The entity knows surpassing B rank is not easy, and in the next trial, he won't level up. He'll only receive items that will help him on his journey. Our protagonist asks about those weapons, and the entity makes it clear they are inexhaustible. If that's true, our boy wants to know why they're still wasting time. He needs to begin the next trial immediately. But he notices the shadow entity is a bit uneasy. That's when the entity says it has something to reveal to its disciple, and afterwards he can decide whether he wants to continue the trials. That dimension is a prison far bigger than Earth, and it has 3 layers. The outer layer contains B-rank creatures, the middle layer contains A rank and above, and at the very center are beings whose levels can't even be classified. The mission of the Shadow Clan is to guard that prison so none of those beings can escape. If that's really true, our protagonist wants to know why the dimensional portal appeared. Only then does the entity reveal that this is the work of a traitor from its own clan. He allied himself with some of the strongest prisoners and started a massive uprising in that dimension. They tried to seize control of the gate and escape into other dimensions. The revolt grew completely out of control, so the entity had no choice but to forcefully shut the gate and wait for reinforcements. But after tens of thousands of years, no one ever came, and it no longer has the strength to maintain the seal. 10 years ago, the portal broke for the first time. Now our protagonist realizes there is a direct connection between that prison, the Tower of Trials, and Earth. Once he passes the 3rd trial, he will become a member of the Shadow Clan and automatically become an enemy of every creature in that prison. He never imagined the shadow entity was worried about this. When the gate breaks, if he doesn't have the clan's symbol, he won't be a priority target. He'll be able to hide and watch the city be destroyed from a safe distance. If that's what the entity suggests, our boy wants to complete the 3rd trial right away. Even if he's no saint, he's not a coward who will wait quietly for his own death. He'd rather move forward. The shadow entity has no face, but it definitely just smiled. If this human is that arrogant, then the entity will be arrogant with him. Our protagonist finally enters the dimension of the 3rd trial. The entity warns that the place is dangerous. Fragments of the souls of fallen heroes from its clan are here. Only with their recognition will he gain control over the tower, and with that, he'll obtain his 2nd ability. This part really interests our boy. He wants to know what kind of ability it is. The entity explains that it comes after soul refinement, and awakenings are unique to each person. The entity itself gained the ability to create clones. Even if its main body is destroyed, its consciousness won't disappear as long as a clone exists. Our boy is curious about what happened to his mentor's original body, and the entity isn't sure. It may still exist or may have turned to dust with time. But it urges him to hurry, because it's eager to see what kind of ability he'll awaken through this trial, thinking to itself that this brat has never disappointed it, and that maybe he'll awaken a power completely different from Shadow's. Our boy walks toward the center. Around him, countless soul fragments float. He reaches out to touch some of them, trying to understand what they might do. The moment he comes into contact with the souls, something entirely different happens. Even though no one remembers that clan, they must defend it no matter what, and now our boy is witnessing memories from the past. Among the memories, there is a severely wounded warrior who acknowledges the limits of his own strength, calling himself weak. But he was never a coward in life. He detonates his own body. His companions rush forward into battle. Not a single one of these shadow beings will allow the prisoners to escape. Our boy is overwhelmed by these brutal, violent memories, witnessing everything as if he were standing inside the battlefield. Countless shadow entities are being defeated with terrifying ease, and our boy senses something in that energy. A darker version of himself appears, saying that every one of those fallen heroes is far stronger than him. Weak as he is, he doesn't belong in that battlefield and should leave immediately. Our protagonist knows he truly isn't strong, but he also has people he wants to protect, as well as ideals that drive him. The evil version calls him a fool and tries to strike him. Our boy says that if it wants to mock him, then go ahead. No matter how strong the enemy is, running away will never be an option. Even if his strength is insignificant in the grand scale of things, he'll still do his part. The shadow entity is deeply impressed by the power being generated from these emotions and becomes even more curious about what ability our protagonist will awaken. Inside his internal battle, the malignant version claims he has a dangerous amount of confidence, and our boy sees he's about to be hit by a massive attack. Acting quickly, he manages to dodge what could have been fatal. He now needs to reposition himself and rethink his strategy. The dark version states that its strength is born from our boy's own fears. That's why he won't be able to resist it. That tiny conviction he has is completely irrelevant. But our protagonist feels he's not the only one like this. All the souls here are the same. That's why he decides he'll keep fighting, because they all sacrificed themselves to protect their ideals. That's the life they lived. Meanwhile, the enemy in front of him is nothing more than his personal demon. After being struck by a punch from our protagonist, the evil version begins to dissolve. With his victory secured, our boy says that was nothing but a bad thought passing through his mind. Nothing more. Finally, the souls of the fallen heroes begin to manifest in him. He gains his second ability, soul protection. He still doesn't know exactly what kind of blessing is, but it's a command-type ability that increases attack and defense for his followers. An extremely interesting power. The shadow entity says the boy never stops surprising it. He's truly exceptional. Then our protagonist notices a massive portal opening before them. The entity explains that this entrance leads to an alternate dimension, the weapons and medicine vault of its clan. Our boy is eager to know what's on the other side. His biggest curiosity is how much material exists beyond the gate. His mentor is very clear about it. They have enough raw material to fuel a war involving millions of people, and everything he is seeing in that dimension is the ore needed to forge their weapons. Our protagonist feels like he just won the lottery. Everything here is invaluable. His mentor explains that the next levels are simulations of what he has already done, meant to help him refine his abilities. Immediately, our protagonist asks what the 6th level of the tower is, but the shadow entity firmly tells him he is not qualified to know the truth yet, and it hopes he never will be. Our boy doesn't like all this unnecessary mystery from his mentor, and he starts imagining all kinds of conspiracies. Since the entity can read his thoughts, it has to force itself not to react to that nonsense. Meanwhile, in the world of the living, the Mustache Man's scientists are working hard. The criminals who used the divine blood were defeated, and they were taken down by the military, which is genuinely surprising. On top of that, the Black Panther is imprisoned as well. The moment he hears that, the mustached old man becomes extremely worried. That subordinate should already be dead. Since he knows too much, he might betray them while in prison. So the old man orders the scientists to speed up the plan. It's time to move on to level 2 immediately. But one of the researchers says the area hasn't been evacuated yet. The mustache man doesn't care about those useless lives. Outside, a countdown begins. The final process has started. A massive portal appears in the destroyed part of the city. Some workers nearby are confused. Their equipment detects a sudden radiation source, which makes these poor workers extremely concerned. Those trapped inside the barrier begin to be infected little by little. There's nothing they can do to save themselves. Those who were trapped inside that barrier are already dead, and the ones who survived need to give a like on this video that helps Momoru make more juicy content for his viewers, activate the cheeky little bell, and I'm out.